Hello everyone, we're going to get started this evening. If everyone could get situated.
Turn off your cell phones.
Welcome to the 5th annual training presented by the Minnesota Child Welfare Training System and the Minnesota Kinship Caregivers Association. My name is Cami Alvarez and I work with the training system in foster parent training. We are thrilled this evening to be able to provide training for informal and formal caregivers on children's mental health issues. Before I introduce our speaker, Sharon Durkin from the Minnesota Kinship Caregivers Association is going to speak about her organization.
Thank you, Cami. I'm Sharon Durkin, the Executive Director with Minnesota Kinship Caregivers Association, and we're a statewide nonprofit. We work with kinship families, and most of the families we work with are not in the formal foster care system. They're caregivers who step in before things get to the foster care system. And the way we do this is we work with a network of regional agencies that provide the direct service with caregivers across the state. So no matter whether you're in Marshall or you're in Thief River Falls, there's maybe a support group, there's information, there's referral to resources in your region. And we have a lot of connections. These community organizations, which we call regional service agencies, have they're bigger organizations. They have 800 numbers for you, and they're able to lead you to the resources that are available within your community or within your region. And you'll find a support group, you'll find mentors, someone to talk to. The things that we do at Minnesota Kinship Caregivers, which was started about 14 years ago, when some grandparents and some professionals who were working with them were looking for resources for these families, and we're having trouble finding it. So that's 1994 when Minnesota Kinship Caregivers was formed. And since then, we've had conferences and kinship. We have a website, and on this website, you'll find our information. You'll find where the support groups are located. You can click on them and find them. Should you have a friend who lives in Iowa and needs information on kinship, there's a link to a place that you can find information for them in other states. We also put out Legal Steps Manual, and the Legal Steps Manual has all the statutes for Minnesota law and on custody, adoption, how to find financial assistance. And this is a very valuable resource also located on the website. And then we have something new. This is a video that will soon be for sale. And this is a companion piece to the Legal Steps Manual. So they go together very well. This has a section on financial, on custody, and so forth. So they work together, and this will soon be for sale. Our brochure will list the different agencies that in the center of it, the regional agencies that you can call if you need someone to talk to, if you want to find the support group, find out about educational workshops or whatever. So that's in the brochure that we have. Back in 2002, we were instrumental in getting the de facto custodian bill passed, and that put grandparents and caregivers on a more even playing field in seeking custody, and so we're very proud of that. We work on making systemic changes, so we're working with Senator Sharon, who's from the Mankato area, and this year we're going to have some kinship bills that we're going to be proposing to try to improve the lives and make things easier for kinship caregivers across Minnesota. I want to thank all of you for coming to this training tonight, and thank the Child Welfare Training System for working with us these past 5-6 years that we've put this on. Thank you.
Well, this evening we have 16 sites throughout Minnesota hooked up, and so for that reason, we won't be able to take audience questions over the air, and you will need to have your microphones on mute for the entire training. What I do have as an option is that at the end of your PowerPoint in the packet that you have this evening, I do have my email address listed on the last box of the PowerPoint, and you are welcome to use that if you have any training related questions. email me and I will see that your question gets answered for you. You have some other things in your packet. For example, you have 4 handouts that are on various mental health diagnoses. Those are for your information to take away from the training, but we will not be covering that information specifically this evening. You also have a double-sided handout from the Minnesota Kinship Caregivers Association, and there are resources listed there for informal care providers. There's a couple other reminders. Please turn your cell phones off. And we will have a 10-minute break somewhere toward the middle, and Deena will let you know when that is going to happen. Well, it is my pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce Deena McMahon to you this evening. She is a clinical social worker who's had over 25 years of experience working with children and families who have mental health challenges. She was the clinical director and supervisor of an in-home services program from 1981 until 2008. She is noted for her work in adoption, attachment therapy, and childhood sexual abuse, and she has also been a local and national speaker on mental health issues. So welcome, Deena.
Hold the applause. Okay. I can actually see St. Louis County live. You in the red chairs? Are you there? I can see you. Wave. Wave. Hi. So you in the red shirt in the front. I see you. You all are seeing the red guy, the guy in the red shirt? There he is. If you guys fall asleep, we'll be able to tell here. You're the only group we're going to be able to keep an eye on. So look lively, because if you start falling asleep, my confidence will ebb, and then it'll be your fault if I don't do a good job. Now that we have who's responsible for this out of the way, I'm proud to offer an evening in collaboration with the organizations that are sponsoring this. It will be commercial free. That's a good thing. It is officially a rerun because we've already done this once, but most of you have not seen it. The feedback that we got from the last presentation was that the content was good, and I'm shocked and surprised that I'm supposed to slow down. Those of you who know me know that that will be quite a challenge, but I am going to speak slower. And since I can only see St. Louis, I won't know if anybody really can keep track or not. Questions? Okay, moving along. I was going to use a sitcom laugh track, but I couldn't get my hands on one, and there are only about 4 people in the room to think I'm funny here. So the objectives tonight are going to be, this is a very broad-based training. There are a number of diagnoses, and it is absolutely not possible to go into them in any great depth or detail. Each one of these mental health disorders, as you know, could require a full day or days of discussion. And if you have one or more of these children in your home with these diagnoses, you'll know what I'm talking about. Many of you probably had to get daycare for tonight to even be at this training, and that's great, and I'm grateful for that commitment. On the other hand, this is probably going to count as your date night, so look lively. In all situations, you know that this training is not going to cover the nitty-gritty or the clinical issues, so you really always want to be thinking to consult with a mental health professional or your professional helper that's involved with your family. This training does meet the mental health training requirement for statute 245A, which is the mandatory training, so that is awesome. See the child. How many of us take shortcuts when we talk about the children and say, oh, I have a child with autism, I have a FASD kid, I have a depressed kid, I have a child with RAD, instead of saying, I have a daughter, Susie, I have a foster child, John, and John has fetal alcohol, John has some attachment problems, but John is a great kid. I know that in the business of caring for kids that we do take shortcuts and try to make it easier to get to the bottom line, but the bottom line is their name and their identity first and their mental health diagnoses second. What's mental health? Well, it is a fluid notion of how we function behaviorally, emotionally, and psychologically, and there's no such thing as perfect mental health, of course. Now you can argue that point, and I'd love to talk to you more about that, but the truth is it's in flux our whole life long, especially for children because they're in such intense growth states. Their mental health changes a great deal from year to year, which is why for many of you, if you have worked with a child who needs diagnostic assessments or new psych evals, every 365 days, their evaluation essentially becomes void, because the thinking is after 1 year, a child's diagnoses and mental health and growth and development can change so dramatically that what was true in 1 year might not be true the other year. That is why we rethink that. It's not so true for adults. We are a more stable developmentally, and so if we have depression 1 year, we might have it the next, but that's not necessarily true for children. The culture of mental health. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, because I work in mental health, I use a lot of jargon, and you have heard a lot of jargon in your practice with these kids as well. And sometimes we take for granted that we all understand what's going on. But culture of mental health isn't just the jargon. It's also where a child comes from, and the family's belief and the community's belief about what behaviors are problematic and what behaviors aren't problematic. Children in foster care are in a cross-cultural situation no matter what, because you never have the identical family that you left and that you walk into. There are always cultural differences. What one family sees as problematic, another family thinks, oh, that's okay. If you're sort of a high energy, active, tend to be not hyperactive, but towards that, and you take a child in that's very calm and sedentary, you think of the child, you wonder, are they depressed? Or is our culture just so active that we're not very tolerant of a difference? So we want to really take into consideration all of that. Jargon. Here's some jargon that some of you probably know. And I'm going to cover these tonight, so I just want to know that we're on the same page. Literally, DSM-4, that is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that all mental health professionals use to find the labels that we use for the children that we diagnose. And it really is just a way to organize behaviors and symptoms and then give it a name. The diagnosis is the name or the label that at best fits the symptom. And as you know, this is not really a science. It's not a hard science. It takes a lot of good judgment and a lot of practice and experience, because what one person might think is depression, a person might actually diagnose as anxiety. And that's not always very helpful. So knowing DSM is very important. DC 0 to 3, what is that? It's called Diagnostic Criteria for Children 0 to 3. It's a new protocol that some clinicians in our state are being trained in. What does that mean? It means that we can now take very young children under the age of 3, look at their behaviors, look at their parenting patterns, look at their caregiving situations and their environment, and then determine where in the developmental milestones are they. Are they not doing well? Are they doing well? Currently what we do in our state and nationally is we do preschool screening, preschool readiness, and that's many times how we flag a child who is behind developmentally or who has some emotional or mental health problems. How about we flag them earlier, because we know the sooner we intervene, the better these kids do. So this protocol really gives clinicians an opportunity to look and study a child's behavior and then intervene. Now, it sort of rubs us wrong, doesn't it? Why are we giving little kids labels? Is that really the way we want to go? I know it's controversial, but here's the challenge. We have always understood that very young children don't do well when they're in a maladaptive caregiving situation, right? When you don't get good care and you're little, it doesn't bode well for you. But what if we have a way to intervene and actually fund the service and a name to call the behavior and a way to intercede before things get worse? That's what DC 0 to 3 is really giving our field. Comorbidity. That's just simply two bad things going on at once. That's what it means, two things. More jargon. Hardwired. This is something that we're talking more and more about as we understand neural brain science. Hardwired is a permanent formation of neural pathways in our brain. That's what that means. It's the wiring, it's the electrical circuitry in our brain that informs all of our behaviors. Prognosis is the outcome. What's the prognosis likely to be? I got stopped speeding. What's the prognosis? Well, I was going 120. It's very poor, right? That would be a poor prognosis. Even as much as I talked I really wasn't. I wasn't going 120. I was going slower. Onset, that's when I hit the pedal to the metal. No, that's when I started speeding and should have slowed down. When the symptoms develop, when it starts and we can identify it's a problem. Mental illness, it's not the same as having a mental health problem. For example, There are diagnoses called adjustment disorder. That's not a mental illness. It's a mental health problem. Depression can be considered a mental illness. Autism spectrum disorder is not a mental illness, but it is a mental health problem. Schizophrenia is a mental illness. And so we want to sort of differentiate what one is and the other is. Regulation, and that is a language that's really born out of the attachment field. Regulation is the concept that a child knows how to calm their own body, their moods and emotions. Child development. You cannot really think about working with hurt kids and working with children with mental health problems without understanding child development. You just can't do it. It's sort of like, how do you be a decent caregiver if you don't know anything about kids? It's hard to do, isn't it? A significant mental health problem can impact a child's development, and in fact often does. Now, every single child that we work with, no matter what their development, or no matter what their mental health diagnosis, goes through every developmental stage, every single one. They don't miss any. They might not go through them in order, and they probably will go through them in a delayed fashion, but they will actually hit all developmental milestones. And when do we know how to intervene, or when should we intervene? Here's the deal. When we have a child, and can you remember from your school days, the bell curve goes up and down, and the majority of children are lumped in the middle of that bell curve. When a child is really outside the acceptable or typical developmental stages, when their behaviors, their inability to learn, their friendships, their social skills are really, really delayed for what we would want them to be given their age, that's when we think about intervening. This is something we, I think, all can accept, that a child who has been neglected and or abused will go through the developmental milestones differently. Neglect and abuse profoundly affects many children. Now, there are some kids who have very, very bad circumstances that seem to be unaffected by their immediate situation. And if we track them through their lifespan, I think we would see that their trauma story almost always catches up with them at one point or another. Each child will demonstrate these hurts and neglect differently. They're not going to behave at the same time. You can have one child do beautifully, one child not do beautifully, and they can come from the same story. Many of these kids, however, will need at some point some kind of mental health intervention, both while they're in your home and while they're in another setting. Diagnosing, I did talk about this. Why I threw this slide in here is what I'd like to say is, in your community there may or may not be somebody who is qualified or trained to do this particular protocol. However, if you call around, if you call many professional organizations, it is not surprising anymore that you will find someone in your local mental health center or your local social service agency that will be able to connect you with somebody who is trained in this protocol. So, it's not about you, eh? How often has someone like me been in your community or as a speaker or your therapist doing in-home and said, oh, don't take it personally, it's just not about you? And did you ever want to sort of spit at somebody like us and say, what do you mean it's not about me? These kids are saying and doing things that are so hurtful and really are meant as a personal attack. And then I'm going to say, yeah, but don't take it personally, it's not about you. It's true and it isn't true. It does seem that these children are purposely going out of their way to make our life difficult. They break our rules, they defy our wishes, and they are often very, very limited in their capacity to get it right. That's true. So let's think about limited capacity. If we accept that these kids have had a rough story and they do have limited capacity, what does that say? They're probably doing the best they can at the time. Does that mean we have to like it? No. We should still try to work with them, absolutely. But they do not have the same capacity or the ability as the typical child. Knowing that is going to inform our behavior. If we're going to deal with a special needs child, we're going to do our parenting differently. These are some of the diagnoses that we're going to talk about. I called it potpourri just because there's a whole bunch of things in there. Now you will notice conspicuously absent is the diagnosis bipolar disorder. It is more and more common for children, young children, school age, middle age, and preschool even, to be coming back from a mental health clinic with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder probably does exist in childhood, but here's the thing. You need somebody highly skilled, very experienced, with a lot of expertise in working with that. I mean, I've been diagnosing kids for almost 30 years, and it's not a diagnosis that I will ever give. Why I care about that is, first of all, if we don't get the diagnosis right, we're not going to provide the correct treatment plan or interventions. Plus, with bipolar, it's biogenic. What does that mean? It's genetically wired in our brain. It's a biochemical process in the brain. And how we treat it is by giving people psychotropic drugs. Psychotropic drugs are very powerful and mind-changing, quite frankly. And we haven't had enough good research to tell us really the long-term effect on a child's development when we're feeding them this kind of medicine. That's not to say we wouldn't medicate or we wouldn't diagnose, but we really want to think about that it's rare, it's atypical in childhood, not common. And if you're in a group of parents and 6 people say, yeah, my child was just diagnosed with that, you know what? Somebody's over or misdiagnosing these kids. So, autism spectrum disorder. I'm going to use the acronyms, okay, instead of say the whole word out loud, except for depression and anxiety, there isn't one. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. ADD or ADHD is attention deficit disorder, and there's 2 distinct types. There's oppositional defiant disorder, which is ODD. There's reactive attachment disorder, which is RAD. And there's FASDA, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. FASDA used to be called fetal alcohol effect or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and we no longer differentiate between the two. Dual diagnoses, what does that mean? That's comorbidity. You got more than one thing going on with these kids most of the time. In fact, it's unusual anymore for a child who's been in the foster care system for any length of time to really only just have one thing that's not working so well. And when I say foster care, I am talking about formal and informal children who, for whatever reason, have needed to leave their family, their birth family, and find an alternative care situation. Autism, ASD. What causes it? We don't know. And here's the scary thing about that. It's incredibly on the rise. If I knew now what I had known 20 years ago, I would have decided to specialize in autism because there are so many questions and there are so few answers. There are more and more children correctly being diagnosed with autism. We think that there's part genetics, a genetic vulnerability. We think it's part environmental, but we don't really know. We're doing a lot of guessing. Well, if we're guessing what causes it, guess what? It's really hard to figure out how to treat it, isn't it, if we don't know the origins. It can be inherited because there are families, birth parents, who have more than one child on the autism spectrum disorder. And when I say spectrum, what does that mean? It means you can have a child mildly, moderately, or severely impaired with symptoms of autism. Now, DSM is sort of goofy in regard to autism because ASD, or autism spectrum disorder, as it stands alone, is not considered a mental health problem. Go figure. Those of you who are living with a child like this think, yeah, how can that be? Because it's considered a medical condition. However, when the child starts exhibiting behaviors related to the autism, we call that Asperger's. And Asperger's is actually considered a mild to moderate form of autism spectrum disorder, not a severe one. Although I have seen kids with Asperger's seem significantly impaired, so it just depends. Symptoms. Tactile defensiveness. What does that mean? Don't touch me. Don't touch me that way. Don't touch me there. Don't touch me with that, or don't just touch me at all. Or touch me hard. Touch me with a lot of deep pressure, but don't touch me lightly. Don't ever surprise me and touch me. Tactile defensiveness for these children is a marked symptom. Your typical kid doesn't have the defensiveness about touch that a child with ASD has. They're easily overstimulated. For example, if I went, "Bah!" Now you all woke up. But if you had ASD, you'd be under your chair, okay? You wouldn't like what I just did. In fact, you might have to go away from the room. In fact, the next time somebody said, let's watch Deena on TV, the child might refuse because they remembered that sound and they didn't like it. They would be easily overstimulated. Perseveration, what does that mean? A repetitive behavior would be perseverating. I could, like this, that's perseverating. I could bang my head against the wall, that's perseverating. I could rock, I could pick, I could use repetitive language and say the same word over and over again, and that would be considered perseveration. Spinning my head, banging, rocking, all of that. It's pretty common. Difficulty communicating, and what I ought to have said, if you're following along in your PowerPoint, is verbally. These children communicate. They just don't do it in a way that makes so much sense to us. They know what they want to say. They know what they'd like to have heard, but their capacity to use verbal language to express it is very, very frustrating for them, and certainly frustrating for those of us who live with these children. Difficulty with transitions. What does that mean? It means they can't necessarily easily or gracefully go from one thing to another. And I don't mean, oh, look, it's time to put the game away. Grandma came over. Let's go out and play. That's a big transition. Or it's time to put our books away and get on the bus and go home. That's a big transition. I mean, it's time to put your bowl in the sink and go in the living room. That can be a transition. It's time to take your shoes off and put your slippers on. Can be a transition. For these kids, if you think of those things as transitions, think of the hundreds and hundreds of transitions a child with ASD experiences. And here I am telling you, transitions are hard for them. They don't like them. They don't do them gracefully. And their day is chock full of transitions. Impaired motor skills, they're clumsy. They have an awkward gait. They're not someone we'd see walking down the street thinking, look at their grace and poise. They look like they walk with 3 left feet, quite frankly, sometimes. And I'm not being disrespectful. It's just an odd motor activity that they do. Clinical characteristics. What is that? This means that this is the list that we use to sort of decide whether or not they have autism. And the things that for me are most critical are these things that you see on the screen right now. Social relatedness. What does that mean? They have a hard time figuring out relationships. Imagine being a person and not really understanding relationships. Human beings are unique in the mammal world because we crave relationships. For the most part, we want them. We want connectedness and connections. And if we struggle or even are aversive to them, imagine how lonely life might be. And the use of language. Most of us rely on oral auditory learning and the spoken word as a way to learn, to communicate, to laugh, to love. And when that's missing from our repertoire, the landscape can be pretty barren for us. And then the stylistic repetitive behaviors. They have a very, very narrow but very passionate interest in just a few things. For example, a child might like, and I was thinking of examples, but it really wouldn't be, ASD child probably wouldn't like Spider-Man. There's too much going on the screen. But they might like a few scenes from the old movie On a Golden Pond, okay? And they might do a close-up of 2 people talking where there's lots of facial activity going on. And every day after school, they might play the same clips of the same movie 10 times to get their fix, and that would be their fix. And so to say that child loves TV would absolutely be false, but to say that child loves one movie, 10 clips out of the whole movie would be true. And try to get them to watch the beginning of the movie or the end of the movie, absolutely not. They're not interested, and they have no capacity to say, yeah, I'd like to sort of discover what's out there, and they just want the middle, that's all. Interventions, wow. Well, I already said we don't know what causes it, so it's hard to intervene, and now I'm going to tell you some things that we can do. I hope that doesn't seem contradictory. We want to identify the child's strengths. Any child you live with, of course, if you care about them and you're raising them, you want to know what they're good at. And they're not going to be good at a lot of stuff, and they're going to be good at some things. And some of these kids are good at just a few things. Whatever it is, we need to know what they're good at first, and we need to know what their comfort level is first. Because we're going to use what interests them to motivate them. So maybe we would have picture books, heaven forbid, with Jane Fonda in it. I don't know if that's the Golden Pond, if that analogy isn't going to play out for me here, but if we know they have an interest, that's what we're going to go after. And we're going to create opportunities to choose. If you're a child and you have autism, and you have a caregiver who is sort of trained in the old school, you know what is happening to that child? That child is being supervised, directed, and sort of bossed around every minute of every day. They have very few opportunities to say, I don't feel like doing math now, I want to do English. I don't feel like doing English right now, I want to watch my fish. I don't feel like watching my fish right now, I want to watch them later, I'll do math now. Mostly we say, no, this is the fish watching time. No, this is the math time. This is the English time, because we don't want to be overly flexible, because we think, whatever, they'll get out of their routine. It'll spoil them. It'll set them up for bad expectations. And I want to say, if you all didn't have the opportunity to insert your own will in how your day went every day, you'd go nuts. You would be pretty miserable. That is not how human beings want to interact. And honor refusals, what does that mean? When a child says, no, I can't, no, more times than not, they're saying no because they can't figure out how to do it, or they don't believe they can do it, or they're scared of doing it. And maybe we say, okay, let's do it later, we'll try it later, and we might not be met with a refusal, but more times than not, pushing through that refusal to get compliance only teaches the child that adults are powerful and that they don't have a vote. Okay, and that's not necessarily what we want them to do. Now, the last point I want to make on this slide is don't ask them to earn the thing that they need to regulate. Now, what does that mean? I learned this from Dr. Barry Prezant, who is an expert in this field. He said too often what we've done with children, all children, but especially this population, we say, okay, what you really love is Blue's Clues. Okay, you want to watch Blue's Clues for 20 minutes? First, you need to sit down and do a little math and a little reading. And when that's done, you can watch Blue's Clues. And the child has just come home from school. They're pretty dysregulated. They've not had a great day maybe, but they can't really explain that to us. And that's backwards. What we need to say to that sort of overstimulated, anxious child, that they get off the bus, they race to the TV and say, yeah, let's watch Blue's Clues for a while. And when they have their 20-minute fix of Blue's Clues, they can be calm enough to sit down and maybe do a little math and maybe do a little reading, okay? We put it backwards sometimes. We can't ask them or withhold from them the thing they need to relax to get the thing done that we want, okay? Does that make sense? If you do if-then with them, it's going to fall on its face. Slow down. That's not a clue for me. That's what we're supposed to do with these kids. Slow down. Actually, if it were a clue for me, it would be every fifth slide. Slow down. Okay, in St. Louis County, how are you doing? You okay there? Are your chairs comfortable? Yeah, chairs are good. I'm good. Some counties have hard plastic little chairs, and you don't. Some counties are having beer and popcorn, but not you. You're wondering where they are, aren't you? Haha. Well, I'm not telling. Slow down. What's that mean? Yeah, see, I'm seeing you going, oh, where's the beer? Allow time to process. That's for you and that's for the child. Moving right from one activity to another is not necessarily a good thing. I think knowing what your skills are, I said start out with the child's strengths. What are your strengths? What do you know about autism? What do you know about yourself? I can tell you that this population of children is the most challenging population for me to work with. Why? I like a lot of stimulation, I want to talk, I want to be talked to, I want to be active and interactive, and I don't want to be slow. I want to be moving around, and I want to touch and be touched. I terrorize some of these children. I put them into trauma places because they don't know what to do with me. I overexcite them. Someday that'll be flattering, but right now I just know clinically that's a bad thing. I don't want to overexcite kids with ASD, and I know that that's not the best population or the best fit for me, okay? I know that. And so if I'm working with an autistic child, which I do, intentionally, I'm going to pace myself. I'm going to be conscious of my movements. I'm going to be conscious of how fast I talk. Maybe I just shouldn't talk much. How about if we don't communicate auditorily with language, maybe we shouldn't just talk so much. I want to have a plan with these kids. I want to know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I don't want to be necessarily spontaneous. I'm not sure spontaneity plays well with the ASD child. They want to know consistency and they want to know what's coming next. You all might like surprises, but if you have ASD, Surprises scare you because you lose your sense of confidence. You want to be clear, after we do this, then we're going to do this. Now that sounds boring. Boring is good. Boring is fine for this child, okay? Be boring. Allow time for transitions. Just allow, take the time. You are not going to be able to say, oh my goodness, Johnny, we were supposed to be at music 10 minutes ago. We're late. Hurry up and get your shoes and your coat and your backpack. Let's go. Johnny would be in the corner perseverating. Johnny would think, you get away from me. You just raised your voice and I didn't like it, okay? You would have set Johnny off. You're not going to be able to do that with Johnny. You're going to have his backpack ready. You're going to have given him a time to know. You're going to have maybe given him a clock that he can hold and watch and keep time of, or a buzzer that will go off to remind him, or maybe an hourglass with sand in it, so when it's gone, he knows he has to get his coat and shoes on. You're going to do a lot of other visual clues rather than verbal clues to help him know when it's time to be ready. And then, of course, you're going to have to use a few for yourself so you don't forget to be on time. And take time to read the child's cues. They have cues. They have signals. And reading those signals is very, very important. And it's a skill. It's very much a skill. If you have lived with a child with ASD, you learn a certain attunement. You know when they're distressed. You know when they're hungry. You know when they need something. But the average person can walk into your house and absolutely not get that. Which is why if you're working with this child, you're going to spend a lot of time at school informing school staff about some of the ways to understand and to communicate with the child. Okay, treatment. Oh, I wanted to back up. Transitions. You know what? What if I said to you all, it's bedtime, get ready for bed? Okay? Now that's an instruction, easy to follow, and it's a transition, and I'm saying, get ready for bed. Now, what does get ready for bed mean for you? Does it mean check the locks on the doors first? Does it mean see if my teenagers turn the lights out? Does it mean my puppy's locked in his kennel? Does it mean that the phone's on the hook? Then does it mean I head upstairs and I do my hygiene thing? Then I say some prayers or not, whatever. Get ready for bed. For you, if you wrote everything down you did to get ready for bed, you might have a list of 30 things. How many of you would hop on the bed and start snoring if I said get ready for bed? Well, you wouldn't. Those of you who can't see St. Louis County, they're all raising their hand. They'd say yes, that's what they would do. They would pop on bed and go to sleep. Oh, okay, I'm joshing with you. Do you get my point? That we say simple verbal instructions that for a child with ASD can be immensely complicated, that require a list of 20 or 30 things just to get the job done. And taking that into consideration will help you and the child be much more successful. Treatment. Your physical environment. What does that mean? The house you live in and what the space feels like, smells like, looks like. And as I said earlier, surprises and spontaneity are not good. If you have an ASD child, you don't want to surprise them by redecorating their room and rearranging the furniture while they're at school. That would be a bad thing, okay? They would like it the same color and the room in the same configuration. They probably want the same foods, and that's okay. How you manage your physical environment, is it calm? Is it collected? Is it predictable? Is it quiet? Does it allow time to think and sit? Is it respectful in tone of voice? All of those things is the physical environment. And when you change that, you will activate the child. We want to break tasks down into manageable steps. Again, that's like sort of get ready for bed. Get up and get ready for school. That's another 30-some list. Okay? Maybe you get ready for school means time to open your eyes, time to look at the clock on the wall, time to put your feet on the floor. And in some cases, children actually do this mental list in their head to prepare. A predictable routine and structure. Again, spontaneity is not good, boring is good. Realistic expectations. And I want to say, yeah, you can go, yeah, I can have realistic expectations of these kids. And I mean that, and I mean you too. You need to have realistic expectations of you. You're not saints, and you're not perfect, and you're going to get impatient. You're going to lose your temper. You're going to get frustrated. So what? Because tomorrow's another day. So what? You're going to do that. It's not great, but it's going to happen. These children are very, very trying at times. They require a great deal of patience and constancy, and you are just who you are. And don't beat yourself up on days when you don't think you did it right. And then about this, I want to say these kids aren't going to necessarily walk up to you and say, you know, Mom, I feel sad. Dad, I had a bad day, and I've been thinking about the grandma I don't get to see anymore, and I feel sort of bad about that. Could I write her a letter? These kids won't express that, and don't ever assume they don't feel that simply because they cannot express verbally or show their emotion in a way that's understandable for us. Doesn't mean that they don't think or feel with the same passion and intensity. I had a dad who disrupted on an adoption after 3 years, and the child was ASD. And he was not really doing a very good job of saying goodbye. And the child was kind of sort of begging not to be left behind. And I said, how am I or anybody else going to explain this to your son? He said, oh, you don't have to worry about him. He has autism. He doesn't really feel feelings the way a lot of kids do. This isn't going to really hit him like it would a typical kid. What do you think? Oh, he's not really a human. He doesn't really have a heart that'll break. He doesn't have a brain that tells him how to feel sad. Is that what that means? And so often I have seen misinterpretation of a flat affect, which means it doesn't look like they're feeling, to mean that they aren't feeling, and that just isn't true. Medication, many kids with ASD have many different assorted medications for sleep, for anxiety, for depression, for what's called OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. These children are clearly obsessive and can very often be compulsive, and medication is helpful with OCD, and it can help with ADHD symptoms. Many autism kids have ADD or ADHD, and these medications can and do help. So back to comorbidity, typically a child has autism spectrum disorder, and they will have other things going on. Now, how to know what to do first. Here's the rule of thumb. If a child has autism, autism is primary. No matter if that child is also anxious or the child is depressed, I'm not going to chase those symptoms without understanding autism, because all the best practice or skills that I know for a depressed child, if I don't tailor it so that the autistic child can make use of them, I'm wasting the child's time and your time and my time. So always with ASD is a primary diagnosis, and the rest of what we do is just trying to be helpful with the other things that are sort of on the side. Prognosis, there is no known cure, all right? Now, I'm an optimist, and I believe, and we are actually funding research for ASD in a huge way in this country, which is good news. I believe we are going to learn in the next 5 to 6 years so much more about this disorder than we know now. And a decade from now, we're going to feel like we're going to wonder why it was so mysterious to us. I truly, truly believe this is a particular disorder, because it's on the rise, because it can be devastating to families and children, that we are going to figure this one out sooner than later. What caregivers report, that would be you all, that finding good service providers, people who understand ASD and know how to effectively intervene, is very difficult. Mental health professionals who are skilled in this arena, or teachers who are, or mentors or personal care attendants, are hard to come by. And I appreciate that that is true, and that finding and using service providers and teaching the greater system about autism is as stressful as autism itself. And then the siblings in the home, of course, are highly stressed by a child with ASD, because you have to modify everything you do. You don't just say, hey, let's all go to the park, grab your shoes, we're out of here, it's going to be a blast. I know it's windy, and your brother Johnny doesn't like wind, and he's going to be hiding under the bench, and you'll be embarrassed, but you know what? Let's go anyway. And you know that's not going to fly very well when the children in your home are older, and they think that their brother Johnny isn't cool. You know, if they're old enough to know what cool is, they're going to be embarrassed by his behavior. And then public outings with Johnny is all of a sudden going to be problematic. And the family defines itself as ASD. 100 times I've had folks come up to me and say, hi, my name is Scott, I have a child with ASD, or hi, we have ASD in our home. And people will define themselves, their parenting, their relationship with the child based on that diagnosis. co-occurring, they're anxious, they're nonverbal many times, they're oppositional. Why are they oppositional? Because they don't really understand what you're asking them, and or they're afraid to do it, or it doesn't make sense to them. Not just because they like to have an argument. These kids don't just like to argue. Arguing is unsettling for them. Treatment approaches always take precedence. Okay? That's autism. Now, this is typically when I'd say, raise your hand and I will answer your questions. But that's not going to happen. So let's move on to something like depression. Second diagnosis of the evening. It's brain-based. What does that mean? Depression isn't an attitude, and it isn't a thought process, although it affects our attitude and our thought process. Depression is a brain-based illness, okay? It is a chemical imbalance in the neural synapses, that's the space between our nerves in our brain, that causes us to feel differently than we ought to. There's no single cause, and although unlike ASD, we have some idea what causes this, again, I wouldn't say that we are real clear that we know all about this. It's not necessarily related to a life event. What does that mean? Oh, my house burned down and my husband left me and I got depressed. Might be true, or my house burned down, my husband left me, and I have a predisposition. My mother was depressed, my grandma was depressed, my aunt is depressed, and guess what? When something bad happened, I got depressed. I might have just gotten really mad, okay? But instead I got depressed. So there were a lot of reasons that caused that. The statistic, 1 in 5 teens in the United States qualify or meet the clinical criteria for depression. 1 in 5. Isn't that a shocking number? 1 in 5. For those of you who have more than 5 teenagers in your household, statistically speaking, you got more than one that's depressed. Isn't that shocking? What about our culture is so difficult and so stressful that we are creating clinical depression? Depression factors. Genetics, your family history is very, very powerful. I think something like 45 to 50% is if your family of origin has depression, you are that much more likely to have it or a child that has it. Of course, alcohol use abuse and drug use abuse is a contributing factor. Many times I have seen children that look so depressed, and it turns out they're using, and once their use goes away, they don't look depressed anymore, which is nice, actually. Major loss or change in life can cause it. Chronic stress can cause depression. Why is that? Well, we don't know what makes some brains resilient and some brains not resilient, but we do know that stress changes the brain. And after a while, when the stress is high enough and consistent enough, the brain says, I can't do this. I don't like it, and I don't have to, and part of it just shuts down. The brain doesn't like chronic, intense stress. Now, some people get anxious under chronic stress. Some people get depressed. Why is that? We don't know exactly. I mean, maybe someone knows. I don't know. Symptoms, changes in sleep, appetite, impaired concentration, short-term memory. And you're all thinking, yeah, we all have that. But you know what? You don't all have this most of the time. And if you have most of these for a significant period of time, maybe you should think about depression. These symptoms have to persist over a period of time. It's not like 1 week your child has these symptoms and you go, oh my gosh, they must have depression. No, these symptoms would persist for weeks and weeks, and then you'd think, oh, maybe depression is an issue here. Loss of interest, okay? This is the one that I care about a lot when I'm diagnosing kids with depression. Why? Kids are supposed to be interested in the world. Now, if you have an adolescent, your adolescent doesn't come home from school and say, wow, school was so fun and so interesting. Life in general is interesting. Wait till dinner. I can't tell you all about the interesting things I learned. This is going to be cool. No. Your teenager would come home and you'd say, how was school? What'd you do? Nah. How was science? Lame. Want to say anything more? Duh. And that's what you might get. And you think, oh, this kid isn't very interested in his or her world. Then the child goes to his or her room, and they're texting, and they're IMing, and they're iPodding, and they're iPhoning, and they're IMing. They're eyeing a lot of things. They're doing lots of stuff. And they're wildly interested, just not in you. That's typical for an adolescent, okay? But if you have a 5 and a 6 and a 7 and an 8-year-old, and that's what they're doing, you should be worried. Because little kids want to tell moms and dads and caregivers about the exciting things they were exposed to. They don't want to sit in their room by themselves. That isn't typical. Now, what about the teenager who goes to his or her room and doesn't do any of those things, and they sit, and the phone doesn't ring, and they don't know who to call, and it's way, way too quiet? That's loss of interest. When the child is not interested in the things other children their age are typically interested in, or they were interested and they're not anymore, that's a red flag, and that's when we really want to care about it. Characteristics more. They're volatile. What does that mean? That means you say, hi, how was your day? I see you didn't empty the dishwasher. Would you stop yelling at me? You're always yelling at me. It's like, I didn't yell at you. I said I just saw you didn't empty the dishwasher. You're always on my case. I just can't stand it here anymore. You might have more than a crabby kid. You might have somebody on the verge of depression, because that volatility isn't really typical, is it? They should be able to say, yeah, no, okay, I'll do it later, or, oh, get off my case, but I'll do it later, or something like that. But that high emotionality that's reactive to one small thing that you would say might be a symptom of either anxiety or depression. They appear defiant in their stance. What does that mean? They're aggressive or passive aggressive. They use that as a way to not have to do things. That goes to self-esteem. These kids have very low self-esteem. Depressed kids, no matter what age, they look around and they see other kids their age doing stuff they're not doing stuff well that they can't do well, doing stuff and having fun that they no longer enjoy. And you know what? They feel weird. They know that they're a freak. There's something wrong with them, and they just haven't figured it out. And they try to mask that self-esteem problem and their insecurities by being angry or by being oppositional. They would rather argue than be compliant and not get it right. This is many times when we see a child in the classroom who is maybe dissociative, which we'll talk about later, but they may be depressed and they can't quite get the homework, and the teacher will come up to them and say, I've asked you about this homework. Why aren't you doing your homework? And the child will be disrespectful to the teacher or do something that's obviously against the rules, because the child would rather be bad than dumb, right? You'd all rather be bad than dumb. And so the child will purposely set themselves up to be in trouble, and what they really are is depressed, but they mask their symptom. And then what we say to them is, why'd you do that at school in math? Why'd you tell your teacher she looked like an ugly duck? You know she likes ducks. That was so wrong. She has pet ducks. Can't believe that was a slur in her family system. Wow. And you knew it. It was the rule of the day. And you say, why? What? And the kid looks at you. You know what? They don't know. They have no idea why they did it. They don't have an insight. Well, what do you expect your depressed child to say? You know, life is hard, and I'm having a difficult time really tapping into my inner true feelings, and I'd like to do some more introspection about that, and later when I've gained insight, I'll sit down and tell you what I've learned about myself. No. Your kid, when they say, what, are you depressed? Duh, you don't know nothing. That's what your kid's going to say. They're going to say you're stupid. And what the kid is going to feel is, I probably am stupid. And that whole ugly cycle will happen. So what do you do if you can't say, why'd you do it? What do you say? Nothing? No, because you know the teacher's going to send a note or call you because the kid called her an ugly duck. That's wrong. You're going to say, wow, sounds like you had a hard time in math today. Sounds like school didn't go as well as you'd like. I remember some days when I was in school, I had that happen too. Dang. Want to talk about it later? And maybe that would be the most empathic, sensitive, caring response. Maybe the child will then not be defiant, go to their room, come back and go, yeah, I guess I could talk about that. Well, she does look like a duck. No, wrong answer. They're often self-defeating. What does this mean? This is the child who, at times, shows streaks of brilliance and looks like they can do almost anything. They start out on a good slope. They're not depressed. They're thinking, I can do it. I'm going to turn my homework in. I'm going to do okay. I'm going to take that advanced English. I'm going to try out for soccer. I'm going to make soccer. Oh my gosh, I made soccer. I've never made anything in my life. I can't believe it. And you're cheering because it's the one accomplishment the child has nailed in the last year and a half, and you're excited, you've written cards, it's in your Christmas letter, the child's on the soccer team, this is so cool, and the child's doing pretty good, and then they get selected, and they're even on a better team than they thought they were going to be, and then the night before the big game, they've got a pretty good win-loss record, and they're playing the best team in the league, and you're excited, and the child's excited, and the child blows up, or the child gets kicked off the team, or the child decides to be truant that day, knowing that he or she will not play. And doesn't that just break your heart? That self-defeating behavior, that thing of, oh my gosh, I can't take the pressure. I know I'm going to screw up. I know I'm going to let my team down. I know the coach is going to pull me in or not play me. I'd rather stay home and blow it on my terms than go and try to do well and blow it on theirs, because my self-esteem can't tolerate it. Self-defeating behavior is really about a lack of confidence and a lack of self-worth and value. Treatment. Medication and supportive therapy. Those are the two things. Every research outcome study that I have looked at about outcomes for this disorder says kids need medication and they need therapy. Now, what does therapy look like? Here's what I want to say. I have a bias. I'm a family therapist. Don't necessarily take your child and drop them off to 1-hour outpatient therapy and expect their depression to get better. Okay? Their depression didn't develop in isolation. It's not going to get better in isolation. They need supportive individuals who care and who are committed to sort of be talking with them and with their therapist about their symptoms and their strategies and their plans. I think that getting kids better is really a family job and not a child job. And too often it's become the therapist's job. And we therapists, we don't know what to do with your kid when you bring them. Do you know what we really do? We just play checkers. You think we're doing therapy when we close the door. We're not. We're taking a nap and playing cards because we don't know what to do with your kid. Once you come in the room, all of a sudden there's work to do because you know what's going on with your child, and we like that a lot better. Most people have more than one episode, so just because the child has one episode and then gets better doesn't mean it won't haunt them later. And 80% of episodes respond favorably. How about that? That is unbelievable. We can't say that about cancer. 80% of cancers respond favorably. 80% of almost nothing responds favorably. Depression is a highly treatable mental health disorder. Threats of suicide. Why is that in here when I'm talking about depression? Do you think? Well, it's because depressed kids many times threaten suicide. And they say, I wish I were dead. I'd rather be dead. They might say, I wish you were dead. But mostly it's about them. They have macabre, dark thoughts. Their poetry is dark. Their drawings are dark. And then you've probably heard conversations about when do we intervene? How do we know when to intervene? Should we take it seriously? The beauty of this is such a simple answer. Always take it seriously. It is not your job to know if the child means it. You don't have to know that. You don't get paid enough to know that. Your job is to always believe the child when they say, I wish I were dead, I think I'd kill myself. Oh, I know what to do. 911. I know, that's an easy plan. And whether the child's doing it for attention, so what? Give it to them. They get attention when they say, I just want to kill myself. For the most part, when children do this and we respond appropriately, they learn that we're going to take it seriously and mean business, okay? And seek professional help. Now, what about self-harm? That is not the same as suicide. Children who cut, who burn, who slash, who harm their bodies. I'm not including tattooing, and I'm not including piercing, although that looks pretty scary. Sometimes that wouldn't be considered technically self-injurious behavior. I mean the kids who really do cutting, burning, slashing, that sort of thing. That is not suicidal behavior. It's self-injurious. It's bad. It should always be taken seriously. We always want to intervene and get that kid help, but it doesn't mean the child wants to die. It means they're trying to manage their pain and have some control in their life rather than not have a life at all. Interventions, group work, family therapy, naming the problem as one of chemical imbalance. You know what? To say to a child, you can't help this, isn't very useful. But to say, here's one of the things about your brain. Silly brain that it is. Your brain and your body aren't cooperating very well, and so you don't have a lot of energy. You're crabby, you're irritable, you're moody. I think we can do some things to help your brain and body do a better job. When we say to the depressed child, You know, the problem is you just are so negative all the time. Yeah. Problem is you just don't want to get out of bed. True. The problem is you just don't know how to have fun. Yes. You are now a genius and your child is still depressed, laying in bed, because that's not a choice and it's not an attitude and it's not a behavior. It's a chemical imbalance. So saying all those things, first of all, you sound dumb. And second of all, the child feels ashamed. You have just stated the obvious to the child and they know it. Find small things a child can be successful at. What is that? Might not be much to begin with, but there's always something a child could do. You were out of bed before noon today. Wow. Last weekend, it wasn't until 2. I think that's a good symptom. I think that's a good sign. Congratulations. And we want to make sure we're not blaming them. And we also don't want to say for some of these kids, your mother was just like you, and look at her. She turned out no good too. Probably not a wise choice to tie their bad behaviors into some other person's behavior in their family and then point out the error of their ways. Insight isn't going to help these kids get better. If insight would fix it, you know what? You'd bring him to a brilliant therapist like me. I'd look at your child and go, seems to me you're clinically depressed. That would be insight, right? Doesn't fix the problem. They're still depressed. Prognosis, they recover and they move on to the next developmental stage. That is really, really positive. Recurrence can happen, but families and kids learn how to take this into stride. They say, spring seems to be a hard time for you. Last spring, you went over the edge. We had to go to the hospital. We got into therapy. This spring, we hope it's not so hard, but if it is, what are some things that we can do to help you? If we plan ahead and predict that it could be problematic, what are some things that we'd actually have ready? And that can be very, very helpful. Comorbidity. That means all these things can happen with depression. Depression is one of the more common things that is the hanger-oner or the secondary mental health problem that we see, and it can also be very primary. Okay, anxiety is the diagnosis that's a lot like depression. Now, you all should probably just stand up right now. We're going to take 1 minute. Everybody stand up. Now, I'm watching St. Louis County. Stand up. Stretch your bodies. Stretch. That's enough. Sit down again. Thank you very much. Okay, no. Stretch. Come on. You got to stretch, or parts of your anatomy, you're going to fall asleep. The part that's not moving. Okay, thank you. You're such a cooperative group out there. I'd love to see some. I heard some of you folks that I know are going to be in the audience tonight, and you're probably mocking me right now. Go ahead. Have at it. Anxiety. All right. Almost 1 in 5 children. Where have you seen this statistic before? 1 in 5 children are born with anxiety. Huh? Depression? Their brain is hardwired differently. Dr. David Walsh says if we took a picture of a child that's born with anxiety, their brain would look different, and he actually believes children are born with anxious brains, which is a fascinating way to think about this and very new. Many of the symptoms can be mistaken for depression. Now, here's the deal. Why do I care? Many, many times children come to me with depression as the diagnosis, and it really isn't depression, it's anxiety, because the medication that we use to treat the two aren't necessarily the same, and because the brain chemistry isn't necessarily the same in one disorder to the other, okay? And the behaviors may or may not look alike, but that doesn't mean they're causing the same kind of difficulty. It's environmental and neurological. What do I mean? Your brain, if you can be born with an anxious brain, that's neurological. But what about environmental? Let's pretend in your family system or the child's family that you came from, their family had sort of a anxious, nervous Nelly, worrier sort of personality. Okay, that's neurological. But then the family are what I'd call yellers. They were yellers. Get out of bed! I told you this the 3rd time. Would you get your shoes on? It's time to go to school. You're going to be late for the bus. I can't stand not driving you today. And all day long, the child comes home from school and the yelling begins. The child wakes up to yelling and goes to bed with yelling. You kids shut up and go to bed. What if you're predisposed to anxiety and then you have a family of yellers? Well, you would either learn to stick cotton in your ears, or you would learn to completely tune it out and not be present, or you'd develop something like anxiety because you wouldn't be able to stand it. And then you know what? That child goes to a family like yours that's calm, maybe that's more regulated, that's a little more organized, and nobody's yelling. They don't know what to think of you people. They don't know how to make sense of you because nobody's yelling. And they also think, well, you didn't really mean it because you weren't yelling yet. Okay? They learn to think that adults mean it when they're yelling, and they don't mean it when they are. Characteristics. Moody. This looks like depression, doesn't it? Moody, irritable, sullen, lack of ability to regulate. That's volatile. Same as depression. Frequent crying tantrums. For younger children, we see a lot of crying, a lot of whining, a lot of tantrums. You know what else you see? My stomach hurts, my head hurts, my leg hurts. They need Band-Aids over half their body most of the time because everything hurts. They need aspirin, they need Tylenol, they need cough syrup. And these ailments can come on suddenly. Have you noticed? They're fine and then they go to bed and all of a sudden, and they're not doing so well and they hurt and they ache. A lot of somatic complaints. Many times that's anxiety. Loss of friends or lack of pleasure. Okay? They don't seem to be joyful. You know what? Shouldn't children be joyful? Aren't they supposed to sometimes think that just being alive is good? They wake up and go, I'm awake. What trouble can I get into? That's a good thing. They're supposed to have that. When you see that absence of joy in play, these are children that run around in your home and say, what should I do? What should I do? I'm bored. What's there to do? Like you're supposed to entertain them because they have lost or never developed the capacity to feel joy when they play. They don't know what joyful play is. And they can also be very, very rageful and angry children. Symptoms, they're not going to ask for help. They're not going to necessarily say, oh, I'm so nervous about that. I just don't think I can. My heart starts to beat and my palms sweat and start to breathe hard. Could you just walk me into the school building from now on? Because if you don't, I will have this temper tantrum. I will scream. My PCA will have to be involved, and I'll be in the principal's office before you can get back home. No, they're not going to be able to tell you what they need. And then to say, honey, then we'd say, honey, why do you get so nervous about going to school? What are they going to say? Well, I've been abandoned in school buildings before, and I get a little nervous about adults I don't know, and I'm not sure if you're really going to pick me up after school, so all that comes crashing into my head the first 30 seconds I walk into the building. They're not going to be able to say that either, are they? So why and what aren't very helpful. Oh, honey, can I help you? No. They might even say, no, I don't want your help. Why? They can look around and see nobody else's mom and dad are walking them into the school building. They don't want to be a freak of nature. They don't like that. And they're going to reject your help as a test. But just like depression, when I talked about self-esteem, they're deeply, deeply discouraged children. They don't have confidence. They don't feel capable. If you didn't think you were good at something, anything, really anything, wouldn't that be sad? People sit around and say, what are you good at? Nothing, absolutely nothing. Treatment. It's treated with medication and therapy. Again, just like depression. Two things. Now you can go to desensitization, you can go to DBT, you can go to EBT. I don't care. There's a lot of things out there that help children learn to calm their bodies. Biofeedback is a nice one. Cognitive behavioral is a nice one. All these are therapeutic strategies that help a child master their emotion. Isn't that cool? To master their emotion. And it's not just one emotion. They don't have just one significant fear. They have fear and anxiety about lots and lots of things. Intervention. Well, what is an intervention? You practice doing the hard stuff, right? So let's pretend, and I'll use a real story. My daughter was highly anxious, my oldest daughter, and she did not feel like she could go to a counter and order anything. She was terrified of going to the counter, asking for something, giving the money, and getting change. And we tried everything like bribes. Bribes didn't work. Honey, you'll get 2 Dairy Queens. Honey, you'll get no Dairy Queens. If you can't order a Dairy Queen, you can't have any ice cream. The rest of us will eat ice cream. We tried that. That's not mean. Before we really caught on, it was anxiety. So what we did is we had to drive by Dairy Queen quite a while. Then we had to sit in front of Dairy Queen and look at other kids ordering. Then I had to go order for quite a while. You can imagine how much weight I gained in one summer. It was great. I loved it. Then she had to walk to the counter with me several times. Then one time, she actually held the money, Then one time she got the change. And then eventually, and it was about 3 months, she could go to the counter while I was sitting on the street on the curb and order ice cream. That's anxiety. Now, do you know how bad she felt because she didn't know how to order ice cream with competence and confidence? All her friends could order ice cream. They knew how to order ice cream. They could probably order cappuccino, but not her. It's such a crippling thing for a child to see other children do something competent and they can't feel like they can get it. So you start by doing the little stuff. I have a client right now that's doing this beautifully. She has a child who will be returning home from residential. And the child was in her home as a foster placement for several months, and that didn't work out so good. But she's coming home. She's working to get back there. And this child can't do a car ride. Well, a lot of bad things happen in a car for this little girl. Plus, when she took a car ride, many times she was just sort of dropped off and nobody ever went and got her. So getting in a car for her means, you ditching me? Are you going to be back for me? I'm not really sure, so I'm going to be anxious. Well, this family lives in the suburbs, so they need to do car rides. And it's a lifestyle issue. It's essential. So first we start by washing the car and talking about cars and looking at car pictures and what cars are used for and why cars are good and what makes them break down. Just sort of boring conversations. Then we talk about getting in cars. We practice sitting in the car. We practice cleaning the inside of the car out. We practice putting our seatbelts on and off. We have a buddy, which is a stuffed bear, who gets in the car seat next to the child, and she straps him in, okay? So she practices doing that. Then we do several weeks where we just drive around the block. Pretty soon this child can get in her mom's car, no difficulty, and take a 20-minute trip with a reward at the end. Nothing wrong with a little reward for anybody. And she is learning to master her anxiety about a car. But this woman tried everything first, and none of it worked. Not rewards, not consequences, not punishments. But we had to teach the child that she could overcome her anxiety. Have you ever had a near miss in a car? Like you're in driving, and something just happens, and you knew that could have changed your life. And for some reason, you didn't have the accident, you missed it. What's your heart doing? Isn't it just pounding out of your chest? And you might feel a roar in your ears, and you're hyperventilating, and your palms are sweaty. And if you think about it hard enough, your legs will start to shake. Not that this is average. My friends have described this. I've never had this happen, but I know that people do have it. Imagine thinking or feeling that physical reaction a lot in one day. Wouldn't that be painful? It would, wouldn't it? Medications? Yep, I already said that. Right dosage. Oh, this is important. You will start out on one dose, one medication, might work for a while, might work this spring, next spring. You might think I'll use the same medication for this child, and it might not work, and you have to go back and figure it out. It's an art and a science. Prognosis, the anxious child will probably always seem a little anxious. You're not really going to have an anxious child become Mrs. Laid Back, okay? That's just not their temperament, and it's probably not how they're put together. But it doesn't have to rule a child's life, and it doesn't have to rule your life. This child can't go to the mall because she's afraid of whatever, stores. Well, if you like to shop and you have a child who's afraid of stores, that's just not going to work, is it? You're going to want to get the child to a place where she likes to shop too, or he. I don't want to be sexist. Lots of men shop. Just not well. No, that's not true. They shop great. Can cease to be a significant problem. Comorbidity, just like depression, right? Same? This is a big one. Okay? Post-traumatic stress disorder. You know what that is, right? Because you probably have some children or have had children in your home that have this. It's more and more common. We didn't even used to really have seminars on trauma and on, brain impact and the impact of neglect and abuse. It's new enough, like in the last 10 years, that we can even be conversant. We know it's changing the brain. We're doing a lot of research. We're doing a lot of work on it. Every week, I probably get 2 or 3 flyers on trauma in the mail. Do I want to go and be educated about it? So it's becoming quite common. So I appreciate that when you pick up a book or read an article or see something in paper that you might want to read it, because here's the deal. Kids in foster care system, many of them have been deeply traumatized, many of them. And I think often in the past we would go for We'd understand anxiety, we'd understand depression, we'd understand behaviors, we'd understand IEPs at school, but we would sometimes overlook the deep and profound life-changing effect that their trauma story had on their development. And it does have a big impact. First of all, by virtue of losing your family and moving out of your home, you're traumatized. That's not necessarily what I mean by trauma in general. But when a child is repeatedly traumatized over and over again, which is what we're really talking about, that's when their brain changes. Your brain accommodates trauma and then tries to cope with it. And I knew this, but I just heard it and it made so much sense to me again last week. Our brain knows that we can deal with just so much adrenaline, cortisol, okay? Cortisol is toxic to the brain in high doses. When we're highly anxious, like when we had a near miss, our brain and our body is flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. We can tolerate that anxious state for just a few moments, and then our brain and our body calm us down, or we'd have a heart attack. That's a good thing. So these little children that are hurt over and over again, the baby that cries and cries and cries, and nobody comforts him, and nobody feeds him, and nobody changes him. Or once in a while they do, but mostly they don't. And he just never is getting enough to stop crying. The brain says, whoa, we're flooded with cortisol. Danger, Will Robinson. This isn't good for our little brain. I know what I'll do, the brain says. I am going to artificially raise the cap in this child's brain so as not to cause damage. That's what I'm going to do. It's like raising the thermostat. I'm going to do that so we don't blow out the furnace. Good idea. And in some children, that never comes back down. We talk about hyper-aroused or supercharged children that just can't seem to find peace or quiet in their body. This is sometimes what has happened to them. They've gotten so accustomed to trauma, to cortisol, to adrenaline, to fear, anxiety, that their body and brain have accommodated. Which is why then when we put them in a nice, caring home and family, they don't know what to do with it. They can't make use of nice, quiet, caring. They know about chaos, yelling, noise, and craziness because that's what they're accustomed to. Symptoms can occur immediately, or they can occur quite a bit after the trauma, and there's no real rhyme or reason. I'm seeing children right now that were traumatized about 2 years ago, and they're really falling apart, and I'm seeing kids that have had bad things recently, and they're falling apart. I can't tell you what the difference. I don't really know. Although I suspect the kids that didn't look like they were falling apart before really were, it just wasn't so obvious. It's an anxiety disorder, okay? So, which is why I talked about anxiety first. PTSD is anxiety. It can be many, many other things, but it's that at the very least. Contributing factors. Now, these are important for a number of reasons. Here's the deal. If you have one bad thing happen in your life, you're probably not going to get PTSD. Our brain and body and our support system can accommodate one bad thing. Even two bad things, we can probably accommodate that. But if we're little and we are dependent and we have to count on caregivers, and over again bad things happen, that's when we're not going to do so well. The seriousness of the trauma, is it a small, medium, or large thing that's happened that's bad? My mom died. She went to work, she had an accident, she got sick, and she died. That's bad. My dad stabbed my mom and I watched. That's probably worse. Okay? I was supposed to keep quiet about what my mom was doing. She was with her boyfriend, but I went and told my dad, and then he stabbed her. That's much worse, okay? There's degrees of badness. It's all bad. It just depends on how bad. It depends on the age of the child. It depends on a lot of things. Is it a repeated trauma, or is it one single episode? The proximity to the trauma. Did I hear about it? My mom died in an accident, or was I actually in the car and I watched my mom die? That's much worse. The closeness. Did I see it, or did I hear about it? The relationship to the victim. The woman across the street got shot. That's bad. Okay? My grandma got shot is much worse. The relationship to the perpetrator might be one of the most single important features here. When the person who loves you is the person who causes the harm, creates untold damage to a developing child. Parental reaction is huge. What do I mean by that? You have all been at a playground watching toddlers and young children play, right? And you see this little guy, and he's determined to get on the slide, and the moms and dads are all sitting around quietly talking, and this little guy, he's just determined. He's been told no, but he gets up on the slide, and he teeters, and he falls over, face first. Boom! Starts to cry. You can tell who the parent is by the reaction on the bench. The parent will jump up, right? Now the parent who jumps up races over and goes, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? Oh honey, your slides are so dangerous, that's so scary, you shouldn't be on a slide." The child looks at mommy's face and goes, starts to cry, right? Mommy's distressed. Look at her. Man, I must have really hurt myself. This is bad, I'll cry. Versus the mommy who walks over and goes, "Good job. Well, you're such a big boy. Slides are fun, aren't they? You want to try it again?" Johnny looks at mom and goes, "Oh, that was fun. I'll try that again." Mom's reaction informs the child about how bad his boo-boo was. How does this play out in trauma? A real-life example, the child who's sexually abused. The little girl informs her stepmom, "I was sexually abused." Stepmom has really been the parent of her life and loves this little girl very much and is devastated. So a report is made and the perp is removed from the home. But mom can't get over it. Stepmom cries and cries and cries and cries and cries. She's called the police. She's called the lawyers. She's called the social worker. She's called me. And every day she's on the phone, want to get home from school talking, the child's hearing, and mom just can't sleep, and she's sort of a wreck. And the child thinks, wow, I knew it wasn't a good thing, but I didn't know it was this bad. This must really have been bad, this thing that happened to me, because in order for my mom to have fallen apart, I know that this was close to the end of the world. And so stepmom's reaction in this particular case informs the child. Don't hear me say that sexual abuse is not ever good. It's not ever good. But the parental response and reaction makes a lot of difference. And hypervigilance as a factor. If we're an anxious sort of personality and then something bad happens, we don't tend to do so well with that. I want to talk say one more thing about the relationship to the perpetrator. It is very, very hard. Let's go with the arena of physical sexual abuse for children to be harmed by their caregiver. Children who are treated with love and are used, the family speaks of love and their behavior is consistent. That child grows up and goes, "They said they loved me. They treated me like they loved me. I must be lovable. I'm going to go out in the world and be my lovable self and I'll be okay." Or the child who's treated horribly at home. And the parents say, "You're no good. You're worthless. You're never going to amount to anything. Can't wait till your sorry ass is out of here." The child goes off to school feeling pretty worthless. But a teacher or a foster parent gets their hands on this kid and says, "Your parents didn't know you. They were dead wrong about you. That is not who you are. You're an awesome kid. I haven't seen a kid with these kinds of skills before in this particular whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Wow. Stick with me, kid, and I'm going to show you some more awesome things about you." That kid can grow up, go into the world and say, "I can be an awesome kid," and be okay. But then you got the little boy whose mommy says, "You're my best little man. I sure love you." And then Tuesdays when dad bowls and Thursdays when he plays cards, mommy goes into his room and they have their special time together. And mommy molests him and tells him he's her special little man and that she loves him so much. And yet he's old enough to know that that's not what mommies do with little boys. And he's deeply ashamed. And he thinks it's his fault. And he sort of likes it because he's special and they're sharing a secret. And he's horrified and terrified because she said if daddy ever finds out that daddy will give him away. So he's not really sure what to think of himself. And forever in his brain, the notion of love and intimacy and shame are married. They're embedded neurologically in his brain. And he is going to have a hard time making his way in the world. And that's when I say the relationship to the perpetrator for these children has everything to do about how bad their trauma is. And you can understand that, can't you? Bad is bad, but when good and bad are mixed, and the person who's supposed to be good is bad, not a pretty outcome. these kids, hypervigilance. Trauma kids are triggered easily and they're hypervigilant. What does that mean? I just saw a mom last night with 3 little hard kids, and a foster mom, and she says, these kids, they don't know how to be kids. They dog me. They're on my heels constantly. They don't know how to play. They don't know how to be playful. They don't know anything about how to keep themselves busy. I said, yes, they do. They know all about what adults do. They know everything you do, everything in your schedule. They pay attention. She says, yeah, I'm so sick of it. They watch everything she does. I said, that's because they haven't had adults they can rely on. They've had to pay attention to what adults do. They haven't had time to figure out what kids are doing. Is that going to come easily for them? Absolutely not. That could take years for them to understand the power of play and that they should let an adult be an adult. Well, how does that change their world? Let me ask you this. Did anybody, before the 35W bridge fell, did anybody have an odd compulsion about going over a bridge? Once again, St. Louis County is raising their hands completely as a team. They're all, no, you're not. Okay. You're all going to get mail from around the state. Okay. Some people do have obsessive fears of, like, I can't cross a bridge. But you do it anyway because you have to get to work or whatever. How many people had a worry or a thought about crossing a big bridge after the 35W bridge fell? Well, a lot of us did. I lived not too far from there. I did. And I'm not a real compulsive person. I was like, ooh, is that bridge safe? But I talked to friends who went, I don't know. That's the worst thing, right? When the unimaginable, whoever thought a bridge would fall like that? We never even thought about it. We would talk about lots of things, but not, what if these bridges fall? Okay? What if the 35E bridge fell? What if the next big major bridge in Minneapolis fell? Would you think twice about your route to work if you lived in the metro? Would you buy a boat? Would you swim across the river? Would you quit your job? Would you move to St. Louis County? Would you do something besides have to cross another big bridge? Yes, you would. And then if the High Street Bridge fell, you would do something dramatic, wouldn't you? You would absolutely. And in fact, if you didn't drive another 120 miles to get to work without crossing a bridge, people would think you were foolhardy. When the worst happens and it's unimaginable, and then it happens again and again, we all develop what we think is pretty safe, smart strategies to cope with the unimaginable. Now, if people didn't know that about us, and then we went to another country, we would look like obsessive compulsives. We would look a little mental disordered, wouldn't we? You'd take us, people who are bridge avoidant because we want to stay alive, put us in a land where you have to cross bridges and they're completely safe, people would wonder what's the matter. And we'd wonder why they're all crazy crossing bridges without a thought. It would be such a bad fit. When we take these hurt kids and place them into really great, loving foster families like you, that's the kind of fit we're talking about. You look at their behaviors as sort of crazy and they're thinking you've lost your mind. Clinical characteristics: intense fear, sleeplessness, intrusive thoughts, and memories, okay? Last night, the little guy that I saw, it's been about 1.5 years since the terrible trauma in his family involved the death of a sibling. He's just now starting to have terrible, terrible, terrible night terrors. Didn't have them for the last 1.5 years. I don't know why he's having them now, but he's having them. And I know that they're related to his trauma story, because in the middle of the night, he's screaming out, no, 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 Daddy, no, Daddy, no, no. That's a clue for someone like me to think that there's something going on. They have dreams. They have a lot of anxiety, hypervigilance, frequent physical complaints, and the reenactment of the event in play or work. This is very, very powerful. We see children who, it doesn't matter what they have in their hand, they're doing it with violence. They're doing it with aggression. It doesn't matter what toy maybe the little girl has in her hand. She's pretending that they're having sex. Whatever is going on, they become sort of obsessed about reenacting. And many times, if the trauma happened pre-verbal, they don't have the language skills to tell us, but in their play, we will see themes develop or obsessions develop that if we pay close attention, we might learn something about their story. More symptoms: confusion, anger, irritability, night terrors, regression, auditory learning problems. Now, how do we teach kids? By talking to them, right? We like to talk to kids, and that's how we like to teach them. What if they can't learn by talking and listening? How well are they going to do in public schools in Minnesota, in general, if they're not good auditory learners? They're not going to do good, are they? Because we count on kids being able to sit still like you all are tonight, take some notes, maybe, maybe not, retain some of the information, and use it later on. And if you can't do that, you're in trouble in public school. It's too sad. Now, when I talked about changes in the brain, the impact of abuse and neglect on the changing brain, what we know is children who have significant trauma are not auditory learners. They have short-term memories. They have trouble concentrating. That's 3 very, very serious learning deficits for the average child to overcome and feel like successful learners. Then you know what? We do a test and go, oh, their IQ is high enough. I wonder what this is about. You know what? These kids just have an attitude issue. They don't really care about doing well. You know what? If you've seen the 3rd bridge fall down, you're not really going to care if you've got fresh milk in your refrigerator. Doesn't matter. It's too minor. Doesn't register for you. Sometimes we say to these kids, you're not listening. You're not listening. Last night, as I was working with this one little boy, we were talking, and just short periods of sentences, and I forgot my lesson of auditory learning. I'd say, so, how was school? What? Did you have a good day at school? Yeah. Huh? So at school today, when you were at school, what did you do? What'd you say? And it went on like that, and you're thinking, which one of us has a college education? I didn't sound like I did. I finally went, wait a minute. He's just not even here. He's somewhere else. He's not talking to me. He could care less about school. I wonder what else is going on. So I stopped talking. I got on the floor with him, and I started scribbling on some paper until he got interested, and he started scribbling. And as he was scribbling, which sort of kept him in the present, scribbling, oh, look at that, look at that, look at that, he started talking to me about his school day and something bad that had happened that had sort of triggered him. But for me to sit there and try to have a conversation with him and keep him present just wasn't going to happen. This is tricky. Here's the concept. A child who's a trauma child has flashbacks. They are triggered. Triggered means for no reason that's obvious to you, boom, they're somewhere else. And they're not somewhere else good. They're somewhere else where the bridge is falling down around them. And that's what they see. They see the falling bridge and the people trapped in the bus, and they're there, and they hear the screams and the smoke and the sirens. They hear it all. But you're standing there like, what did I just say? What's this about? I don't get this. That was disrespectful. Want to try it again? PTSD can look like a significant oppositional meltdown. That's hard to discern unless you know the child's history. You can ask in the most reasonable tone of voice, the most reasonable thing in the world, because you're all reasonable people, something of the child. And the child, for reasons you cannot understand, is screaming at you. I hate you, you are so dumb, you're stupid, and they just start throwing things, and they're just out of control, and you're thinking, this child is disrespectful. And they call you names, bad names even. And you're thinking, man. And later on you say to the child, what were you thinking? The child will go, about what? About what? Well, when you said all those things. I didn't say that. Yes, you did. Why'd you say those things? I didn't say that. And you know what? They're not joshing you. They don't remember. They weren't talking to you. They were talking to that other person that experienced the bad thing with them or was the cause of their bad thing. They don't even see you at the time they're screaming and raging. You might think they do, but when you talk to them later, you think, oh, they're just being dishonest. They're just manipulating me by saying they don't really know. And they really don't know many times. So then we make it worse by we say, you were very disrespectful. That was out of hand. I'm not going to be talked to that way. You're grounded. You have consequences. And we're giving a child a consequence for an inability to manage an emotion they hardly even remember at the time. Other than they remember the rage, they don't remember why they were mad. It's not very helpful for them. So then you say, well, what should we do then? Just ignore it or walk away? Absolutely not. You don't ever ignore a child who's triggered. Why is that? If you've ever really been ticked off, righteously ticked off, and you need to say something to somebody, they need to hear a piece of your mind, and the best they can do is go call somebody who cares. Do you feel bad feelings or think bad thoughts about that person? It enrages us to be ignored when we're dysregulated and angry. It enrages us. Children feel completely disregarded and enraged also. So the old advice, ignore bad behavior, is sometimes bad advice. We can maybe not react to the anger, but we're not going to ignore the child. The child probably needs us to stay with them to be regulated. In the moment of fear and terror, we can't desert these children. And even though their rage and temper tantrum might look like nothing but a big spoiled baby, what if it isn't? And what if they're really in a terror spot? What if they're really that child in the night terror screaming, no, daddy, no, daddy, no? Would we ignore that child? Would we refuse to comfort the child? Would we not put him on our lap and rock him and say, shh, it's okay, I'll stay up with you, it's okay? And why do we feel like we should lecture a teenager who has the exact same emotional response and then consequence them? Because their emotional reaction is just like that little child in bed with a night terror. And it's very hard to know. The best, most skilled foster parents I've ever seen get this intuitively. They can sort of sort it out with children, and there are times that I've watched children be what I think is disrespectful, and the foster parent will look at me and go, he's doing this or she's doing this because this is what's really going on. And I gotta say, it's one of the greater opportunities to learn is when you all who are experienced and get the hands-on practice teach the rest of us about the children that you're living with. That is very, very good. And when you figure it out, please don't be shy or don't hesitate because you're, quote, just the foster parent. Okay, you're not just the foster parent, you are the caregiver. And your role as such is absolutely essential as a team player. What do we do? That's a good question, right? Intervention, okay? These kids need to know, first of all, after the thing, that you're still standing. You didn't leave them, you didn't threaten to have them leave, and you're going to reassure them it's not always going to be this bad. You're not always going to lose your temper. It's not always going to be so scary. You're not always going to feel like you're out of control. And if you know what triggers them, you're going to have some rituals. You know what? Bedtime is hard. So what we're going to do is about 6:30, we're going to have a bath. Then we're going to have a little song and dance time. And then we're going to run around and check all the locks on the house. Because just to say to a child, nobody can get into our house, isn't as helpful as, help me check the locks. Then they know the locks are safe. Then we're going to look in the closet and under the bed with a flashlight. Instead of saying, there's nobody in your closet, we're actually going to look under the bed and in the closet. Those concrete things are very helpful. And we're going to get into some therapy, family therapy. Thank you very much. You're not going to take this kid to a therapist to talk about their trauma. That child will go do sand tray therapy. No, that's a good thing. Sand tray therapy is fine. They might go see somebody who doesn't really know about trauma and waste 2 years of the child's life doing not very much, never really talking about the trauma, never getting to the core of the issue, which is not very helpful. Pre-teaching. So after the tantrum, we say to the child, what might you do next time? I know that when I said, please put your shoes away, I'm just sick and tired of picking up your shoes all the time, you went off. But instead, if that's what's going to trigger you, how about I just pick your shoes up and wave them like this, and you go, oh, my shoes. What would be the plan to have that not be such a big problem? How did you feel when that was going on? Do you remember? You don't remember how that felt? Here's how it looked to me. It looked like you were scared to death. And then a plan to stay calm, find the time, get some history for the child, and know what comforts the child, for goodness sakes. Treatment. I want you to look at the bottom line on this slide. Committed caregiving. That's what this requires. Committed, absolute committed caregiving. People who are going to stick with the child, who understand the child, who are empathic to the child, will do the very best intervention possible. All the good therapy in the planet isn't really going to help the child as much as good caregiving that they're going to get in your house. Medication is a very good idea, anti-anxiety or antidepressant, but no way are you going to give a child medication that's going to get rid of their trauma story. Prognosis, hello, these kids get better. Isn't that neat? But a traumatized child will always be a traumatized child. That story will be in their brain. They have lots of other things going on with them, just like many of the other diagnoses. And PTSD may or may not be primary to the child. So, we're going to take a break. I'm sure you probably don't need one by now, but I do. Come back in 10 minutes. I'm getting a sign. You get 10 minutes. All right, 10 minutes, and we'll see you back in your comfortable red chairs. Okay, welcome back. I want to thank my friends in Dakota County for telling me that the sound has been fading in and out. So they have now hog-tied me to the podium where I can't move back. You can't all see the duct tape from my waist down, but I assure you it's there. No, it is not. That's too kinky for DHS. Sorry, Cammie. Next, we're going to talk about ADHD. Now, every single diagnosis that we have talked about so far, you'd think, well, that sounds like ADHD. You would be right to think that it does sound a lot like ADHD, which is why it is so frequently misdiagnosed. To correctly diagnose ADD or attention deficit disorder hyperactivity, which is the H component, we need to observe the symptoms in all the life domains. For example, we need to see it at home, in the community, and at school. And sometimes people will say, well, I think my child has ADHD. She's not doing very well at school. Well, how is she at home? Fine. Or the other way around. Then it's typically not going to be this particular diagnosis. True enough, it does run in the family. If you have a mom or a birth parent that has this disorder, or sibs that have this disorder, it is more common than not that you're going to have another child with this disorder. So we do see that as being true. Subtypes. The ADD are the unfocused inattentive. It's called the inattentive type. They don't necessarily have that hyperactivity, that fidgety, can't sit still thing. The impulsivity component, sometimes the ADD child is or isn't impulsive. Children that are hyperactive are almost always impulsive. And the H is the high energy component. They can be distinctly separate or all together. Characteristics. It becomes more problematic during middle school years, and I will have adults ask me to diagnose very young children, and it does occur in very young children. But here's the rule of thumb, like I talked at the beginning of the evening, only when it really interferes with a child's capacity to feel capable, they can make friends, they can succeed at school along the developmental milestones they ought to be. That's good. And when they can't learn, when they can't make friends, they can't feel successful, then we really want to maybe think about intervening and using medication. The child experiences failure, frustration in spite of efforts, and whenever we have done everything we can aside from medication, maybe we want to think about going that next step. Many times one of the insidious features is that the child seems typical or normal in many other arenas of his or her life, and they just seem like they're not paying attention, like they're choosing to fail, and that's how we speak to the child. Symptoms, lack of attention, right? Makes careless mistakes. They always want to be the first one done. They want to be first in line. They want the biggest cookie. These are the children I teach Sunday school, and I have a couple in my Sunday school class, and before the question is out of my mouth, their hand is in the air. What would be, I know, Mrs. McMahon, I know. What's the question? What do you know? I forgot. Right, put your hand down, I'll ask. What would be the first, I know. Stop, put your hand down. Sit on your hands. Well, they can't sit, so they can't sit on their hands. They seem easily distracted. They are easily distracted. They have poor organizational skills. I have a child with this at home, in my house. And the teacher said to us, if he would just use his planner. Where's his planner? How would he know where his planner is? If he knew where his planner was, he might use it. He can't find his planner. Which planner? He's got 3 planners. I don't know. If he would just concentrate. If he could concentrate, he wouldn't be ADHD, you think? They can't really help it. It isn't a choice. And I have seen children torture themselves. I have a pin in my pocket, and when I start to fidget, I'm going to stick myself. How sad.
That is not a choice to be fidgety. It's just a body thing. They have poor social skills. These are kids that will blurt things out when they ought not to. They will laugh at inappropriate times. Somebody will fall down and they'll go, ha, and it's not very funny. Or they will cry when things are very sad because they can't read social skills so good. More symptoms. They lack a sense of being good at things. That's because sometimes they're not so good at things. And it isn't because they don't have the capacity. They just haven't been able to stay focused enough on the task to get good at it. It has nothing to do with their skill or ability. Like ASD kids, they're going to have trouble with transitions. They can be inattentive. At the same time, there can be things they can be absolutely hyper-focused on. Some children are hyper-focused. Once they pick up a book, the world could fall down around them and you're not going to get their attention. Or they're that way with TV or Nintendo. It's very common for parents to say, he's not ADHD, he can play Nintendo for hours. That has nothing to do with ADHD. ADHD is more correctly diagnosed when a child can't stay focused and attentive on something that they find less interesting and less novel, okay? Those kids can be very attentive to things that they are passionate about, that are innovative or novel for them. So when the child feels frustrated, guess what? They start to feel dumb. And if you have enough dumb experiences in school, enough failure experiences, you start to incorporate that as your identity. Treatment. They perform better with familiar, consistent, structured routines. Like the ASD child, too many surprises and too many changes are not necessarily a good thing. A regular bedtime is a very, very positive thing for these kids. A regular homework time, a regular homework place is a very good thing. Not I'll clear a spot off, sit down and try to stay focused with the radio going on, somebody in and out of the house, the phone ringing, the dog barking. That is not a good environment for an ADHD child to learn. More treatment, medication. Now, I'm going to sound like Dr. Deena here, but medication for this particular population, for this particular disorder, is highly effective. I do not love giving children medication. If we can avoid it, we will. If we can do something that's more homeopathic, we should. And if we need to use a medication to change the brain chemistry so a child can learn better and feel more competent, then sometimes that's the right thing to do. Interventions, reduce stimulation, limit their choices. Would you like to go outside now or outside later, or would you like to go outside after dinner? No? How about you put your coat on and go outside now for a while? Isn't a bad option. Would you like to stay outside 5 minutes or 10 minutes? They'll go outside and they'll stay out 10 because they'll have a good time. Would you like the red, the green, or the blue one? Not a good idea. How about we'll have the red one today and the green one tomorrow, or would you like it the other way around might work? Fewer choices give these children fewer chances to get disorganized and to lose their focus. Look at the child, touch the child, hold the child's face, touch the child's arms, hold their hand. Many times I will ask children if I can hold their hand while I'm talking to them, because that tactile stimulation keeps their face on my face, and if they can watch my facial cues, first of all, they learn how to read cues, and second of all, there's a better chance that they're going to pay attention to me. Give them extra time to get things done. They'll probably need it. And you're going to, for heaven's sakes, have a good relationship with whatever school they go to, because you're going to need very good relationships with school personnel to talk about missed homework, late homework, missing assignments that didn't get done, misunderstandings, maybe fights at school, and that sort of thing. Strategies. Okay, what are adaptive strategies? Adaptive strategies are the things that we teach a child or that we ourselves use to help a child. Medication certainly can be. That's not what I'm thinking. A list is an adaptive strategy. For example, don't ever think the child's going to hop out of bed and be organized. The night before, they should have their list or their post-it note on their mirror, and those are the 3 things that they should remember for that morning to do. That's a strategy. If they're not good at lists, they can have a picture. Go upstairs, brush your teeth, and hang up your clothes is probably too much for a younger child. Go upstairs is a good start. Go upstairs to your bathroom and look at the mirror is not a bad start. On the mirror, the child will see a picture of a toothbrush, a picture of a toothpaste, and a picture of a washcloth. A child can use an adaptive visual strategy to go to the bathroom, brush their teeth, and wash their hands, okay? And you can say, did you brush your teeth? Yeah. No, I mean now did you brush your teeth? Today did you brush your teeth? Sometime this month did you brush your teeth? Because if you just say, did you brush your teeth? They'll go, yeah, they brushed their teeth. And it is true, they did. One year they did. They saw their toothbrush. If you say to a child, do you have your soccer stuff ready? Soccer stuff ready means I saw it somewhere once this week somewhere. Okay? Doesn't mean it's ready in my bag to go. Put things away every day in certain places. An adaptive strategy is a bin with the child's name, a hook with the child's name, a key without your address but with the child's name. The things that you can do that are routine that you can assist the child with each and every day. And even if you are the one helping them hang up their stuff at their hooks and that sort of thing, you will help the child be more organized for the next day. And I'd like to encourage you to think about losing the language of enabling. Oh, we enable these kids. Yeah, that's what good parenting is sometimes. We do enable. We help them be more able to get through the next day in a successful way. So if you hang up their stuff, remind them, or say, here's your thing, I put it away, it's where it always goes, you'll know where to find it tomorrow. Is that compassionate? Is that good parenting? Maybe. Medication. It must be consistent. You can't take medication Tuesday and then not take it Wednesdays. And you shouldn't take it odd days and not take it even days. If a child goes for home visits with a birth parent, they should take their medication while they're gone, and they should take it when they get back to your house. It is not a kindness to the child to take it sometimes, as if it were blood pressure medication, and you could take it magically and it would lower your blood pressure one day and then you don't take it the next. It's not how this medication or blood pressure medication works. You have to achieve a therapeutic level in your bloodstream. Now, many of these medications leave your bloodstream in one day. That's cool, okay? It doesn't stay in your bloodstream. Whatever your values or beliefs or philosophies are in medication, I will tell you the vast majority of parents who have not liked the idea, who have tried it, later say, what a difference it's made. It's been a good thing for the child. Prognosis is a highly manageable disorder. This does not have to be the thing that dogs the child for life and brings them down. And these children can and do find a great deal of success in many arenas of their life, and sometimes typical things are a lot harder for them. They just are. Challenges. These kids are impulsive, right? What do impulsive kids say when they're mad? First of all, if they're impulsive, they get mad more. They get mad more frequently and for smaller things. And then when they're mad, they might say or do things that a more thinking child wouldn't, right? We would think about that as inappropriate and disrespectful. We're not wrong in thinking that. But what's the core issue here? It's impulsivity, and the child just blurts something out and later has to think, well, that's not a very good idea. Trying to argue with the child and say, don't be disrespectful, you won't talk to me like that, at the time the child is angry and dysregulated, isn't very helpful. After the fact, unlike the child who's dissociative, this child will remember they said and did the things they say and do. You can say, you were mad and you were frustrated, but you don't get to call me that. You don't get to hit your sister when she's mad, when you're mad at her. What are some things that you could do instead? What are some words that you could use to express those feelings? Or what are some things, as your mom, I can do to help you when you're that mad so you don't have to hit your sister? You can say, okay, you're grounded this weekend, you lost your temper and hit your sister. It's not going to help the child at all the next time he's impulsive or angry. He's not going to think, oh, last time I didn't get to go somewhere I wanted to go because I hit my sister. No, he's going to think, my sister's making me mad. Boom. Then later go, oh, dang, now I hit my sister, okay? He's not going to connect the dots. I just had a foster mom tell me the story. She said, this child is acting like she has no empathy. You're probably listening. She doesn't have empathy. She stole from me. She lied to me, and can't tell. I mean, she doesn't seem to care that I'm just devastated by her behavior. This is so bad. And the mom is right. That is not great choices. However, the child at the point she stole the money and then told the untruth about it, meant to return the money, wasn't thinking about the foster mom's feelings at all. Wasn't thinking about anything except the money in the purse, and I should have that right now. And only later, when she saw the sadness and the disappointment on the face of this foster mom that she cares very much about, Could she connect the dots and go, oh, stealing the money was related to your feelings? I'll be darned. But for us, we think, I'm sorry, that was a terrible choice. You did that and you hurt my feelings, so you must not care. We have to be careful about drawing that line too fast. Sometimes the child does get it, but sometimes they just don't get it. Comorbidity. Ay, ay, ay. Kids with PTSD look like they're ADHD, but they're not necessarily neurologically ADHD. So do we give them medication or not? Probably not, but that doesn't mean those kids with PTSD don't need a medication for anxiety or some relaxation or some DBT or something to help them sleep at night so they don't have night terrors, okay? Kids with anxiety look like they have ADHD sometimes. Kids with reactive attachment look like they have ADHD sometimes, and a lot of times they do. But you need to know, and you need to have a diligent person really assess the child so that you're not treating something that isn't really true. Because as you know, it is often misdiagnosed and often overdiagnosed. Now the curiosity to me is ADD is underdiagnosed, I think, as opposed to ADHD. Why is that? Because the H gets kids in trouble. And we tend to be drawn to intervene with children with, quote, behaviors. And H is about behaviors. And ADD is about a child sitting there daydreaming. Daydreaming isn't especially effective in the learning category, but it's also not very offensive, okay? Daydreaming isn't offensive to most teachers and most other kids in the classroom. And so we don't assess and we don't intervene. Sometimes those kids fall in the cracks. But the H kid gets lots of attention just because they're H, which stands for hyperactivity, and not other things you were thinking that start with H. Oppositional defiance disorder. Now, this is the only reason I included this in this presentation tonight is because so many of the kids that come to your homes and you aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas who are working with these kids with this have this diagnosis. Oppositional defiant disorder is nothing but a group of behaviors lumped together with this name attached. What does it mean? It means they're naughty bad sometimes, and they like to argue. And they rate what I call high on the PITB scale. That is not a clinical scale. It's one I developed in my own practice. It stands for pain in the butt. And that is what these children can be, is a pain in the butt. Now, how do you quantify that? You would know. Symptoms. They're spiteful, vindictive. They love to argue. They don't negotiate. They want it their way. They always want the last word. Even when you tell yourself, I won't let that kid get under my skin today, they will. They will get there, and then you don't know what to do about it. They will ignore you. They will ignore requests. You'll ask them, and they'll go, in a minute, yeah, later, or I don't care about your rules, and they will come up with some debate about why taking the garbage out is against their moral code. They will not accept blame. Nothing has ever been or ever will be their fault, ever. It is someone's fault. It is their sister's fault. It's usually your fault, but it is not ever their fault. It's amazing how faultless they really are. And they will argue about that point. And if you just say, you could say, vegetables are good for a person. You could say that. And then they would say, you know, what I read or what I heard in school or somebody, you know, and then they would have a reason why that's not true. They, believe it or not, are deliberately annoying. They go out of their way to be annoying. In secret, when they get older, they take classes to annoy adults. Characteristics, here's the deal. Look at this. Low self-esteem. Have you heard a theme tonight? Low self-esteem, anxiety, depression. When kids struggle with being competent, fitting in, and liking who they are, their self-esteem tanks. They don't get along. ODD kids are not well liked by other kids because they're obnoxious. They always want to be first. It's always about them. They always want to be right. They have a high value in being in control. And so their success in school settings isn't very good, and they view compliance as giving in. If they go along or agree or let you have the last word, that somehow diminishes their power, and I think they see that as it diminishes them. And if you don't have a lot of confidence or self-assuredness or sense of self-esteem, you really can't afford to let very much of that go. Treatment, therapy. And for adolescents, and kids in general, I'd say middle school and up, I really like group therapy for these kids, because who will they listen to more than anybody? Their peers. And their peers can say, you don't know what's going on. You are so out of it. When did you come up with that? Boy, that is dumb. That kid who's ODD will listen to his peer a lot more than he will listen to an adult tell him his values. Now, we expect adolescents in our country to have some of this behavior, right? There is no adolescent that doesn't display some oppositional characteristics. They ought to. It's a rite of passage. They're trying to develop identity. They're looking at the adults going, you dress bad and look funny. I don't want to be anything like you. And then much later they'll go, you're sort of cool. I could learn some things. That's appropriate. When they start to argue and push away, trying to figure out who they are, that's appropriate. But when they're 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, developmentally, kids are supposed to want to please adults. They're supposed to want to look at us and see the smile on our face and like that. When they're younger and they love to argue and they love to push us away, that's when we correctly diagnose this. When we diagnose ODD in 15 and 16 and 17-year-olds, we're wasting our time, because those kids are supposed to be oppositional in many regards. But younger kids who are supposed to be in the people-pleasing stage and are constantly argumentative, that's when we have a problem on our hands. Because if we don't nip it in the bud, these kids get worse instead of better. This is not a disorder that just sort of fades away into the woodwork, and we never could think about why the child was such a pain in the butt. Interventions, and this is for you, by the way, you parents, you relatives. You need a good support system. You need somebody that will listen to you vent. You need effective communication with your partner if you're parenting with someone else. And you need a lot of self-control and patience, because these kids will push you to the limit. Interventions, tangible rewards. Unlike almost every other diagnosis that we talked about tonight, this is one where we would say old-fashioned rewards and punishments work. These children are bright enough, and they will work for things that please them and meet their needs, and they will avoid things that cause them discomfort, okay? And when I say punishment, I'm not talking corporal. I'm talking about some consequence that is meaningful enough for them to not like it, okay? They will avoid things that aren't pleasing to them, and they will work for things they like. Isn't that nice? It's sort of like the totem model or the Boys Town model. Some structured routines, pros, cons, charts, all those sorts of things, tokens. Some of those strategies do work for this type of child. However, unaddressed, it can become more aggressive, more problematic, and then become what we think about as conduct disorder, which is the child who's out breaking social and legal rules, and we don't want that. Okay. We're going to talk about RAD, reactive attachment disorder, okay? Now, what is that? It is the most extreme form of attachment disorder that we know. It's the only form of attachment disorder that the DSM even recognizes. But attachment correctly, although you won't find this in DSM, occurs on a continuum from, like ASD, moderate to mild to extreme, and extreme would be considered RAD. But we have anxious attachments, ambivalent attachments, insecure attachment patterns, like crazy in lots of varieties. And what we really try to think about treating is the extreme and the severe ones. What is attachment? It's neurobiological in nature. What does that mean? It is the environment as it comes to the brain, and it is the brain as it's developing in the child's body. And every child has a brain, so every child has the capacity to form a positive attachment. It happens in the first 3 years of life, for the most part, and in utero. So first 9 months, and then the first 3 years, maybe 4, maybe 2, that is when the brain is so busy growing and developing and teaching the child how to have a conscience, how to have reciprocity, how to think and learn from their mistakes, how to find joy and pleasure in a relationship. Most importantly for you and me is it's teaching the child that adults can be trusted, that a relationship is worth having, and that it's safe. The whole child, the RAD child, has suffered harms that include every insult imaginable. And I didn't on this list include sexual, but it's all of these things. Neurological, psychological, physiological means the body, social and emotional. The child's brain does become hardwired differently at an early age. What causes red? Lots of things, but the most common is the top thing on this slide, pathogenic care. Pathogenic caregiving is harmful, bad parenting. Consistently harmful, bad. Not medium bad, but grossly bad, extremely bad. Prenatal exposure to alcohol and violence in utero on a consistent basis will harm a child's brain and hence impair their capacity to form healthy attachments. Caregiver depression. Why is that? Because the mom or dad who can't get out of bed, who can't get off the couch, who can't attend to the child, who experiences or expresses no joy in the child, that child can have attachment problems. And I know that many adult caregivers have depression in various degrees. And when we see that, we want to intervene and think about the well-being of the child. Characteristics, hypervigilance, poor boundaries. These children can have diffuse patterns or restricted patterns. What does that mean? Is the child that's afraid of and rejects all intimacy, or the child that will sit on every woman's lap and call her mommy and say, I love you, will you take care of me? Both are not good, absolutely not good, and one is not worse than the other. In one, the child rejects the very caregiving that he needs, and in the one, the child sets himself up to be a target in a way that's very unhealthy. They don't know how to regulate. What does that mean? Their brain and their body are not connected enough, so that the brain sends the body the messages to say, calm down, it's okay, she's just looking at you funny, she's not going to hit you, you're okay. Or when somebody tastes the last cookie and they're afraid they won't get one, even though they've been told they will, they have a temper tantrum for an hour because they can't calm down. They just can't. And to say calm down doesn't help. They have poor relationships in their family and with peers. Just because they don't form a good relationship with the adult probably means they will also not form good relationships with their friends at school, with their siblings, with their teachers. They have eating, sleeping, hoarding, stealing issues. They don't have to have all of them. They don't have to have any of them. But if you have a child with this diagnosis and they don't have some of these compulsive behaviors, I'd be surprised. But inability to trust is really the most crippling behavior that they have. And is inability to trust a belief or a behavior? It's both. Self-harm and mutilation is not uncommon with this population of children, and they are very, very susceptible to addiction. Why? It numbs the pain, just like for grown-ups. Consequences. Why punitive consequences won't work? Well, here's the thing. I was just talking to a really great experienced foster family this week who have taken in 2 very attachment disordered children in their home. And the foster mom is saying, I've had 50 foster kids in my home, 50! And I feel like I've known what I was doing until I had these 2 kids in my home. And I don't feel like I know what I'm doing because all the stuff I knew isn't working. And I've raised my own kids, and all the stuff I knew raising them didn't work. What do I do? Well, I think the first point is getting to the point of what do I do, and that's a humbling but not a bad place to be. As soon as we start to say to a rad child, if you do this, then I will do this, what the child hears is, if I'm good enough, you will care about me. If I'm cute enough, you will keep me. If I'm compliant enough, you won't hurt me. Oh, I'm sorry. Caregivers have lied and let me down my whole life, and you think I'm supposed to start working for your approval? I don't think so. And they're not going to do it. So every time we think about punishing a behavior from a child like this, or rewarding the stuff we like with concrete rewards, we're probably not going to work, because they hear, if then, and they're going to go, oh no, I've never measured up in my life, I'm not going to play your game. And another reason punitive consequences won't work is if you're a hurt child, if you're truly a rad child, you've lost everything. Your smells, your dogs, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, your house, your blanket, your toys, your bike, your school, your friends, your bus driver, your Halloween costumes that you had stored in a box. You've lost everything that you've ever counted on. And then somebody says, oh, fine, you won't have Nintendo this week either. Big whoop. Nintendo for a week. Oh, that's really going to change this child's behavior? They can't have Nintendo after they've lost their family. It's not going to shape their behavior. It's not going to make them regretful. It's not going to make them remorseful. Treatment. There is one and only one way I really know how to work with these kids successfully, and that is in the context of a relationship. Here's where there are some philosophical differences in the mental health profession, but I will tell you the outcome studies that I have read tell us that you heal a hurt kid by helping them have a connection. How do you have a connection? But in a relationship. How do you have a relationship? You work on that relationship. That's how. And having a child go to individual outpatient therapy to practice having a relationship with a person who is not in the room just seems counterintuitive to me. Which is why many of you are being invited into your child's therapy sessions. That's a good thing. You don't have to adopt the child to be an effective party in their therapy. You don't have to be in all the sessions, but you need to know what's going on. You need to have a relationship with the provider you're working with, and you need to know the details of what the child is working on. And then if the child does start to really do his or her work, their trauma story, and their hurts, you're the one providing the comfort. That makes a lot more sense than having me be the one providing the comfort. I'm not going to go home with the child at the end of the day. You are. It is long-term work. It is not brief work. And it is typically family-centered. And I have SIBs, foster, adopt SIBs. I have everybody involved in the room that's involved with the family whenever possible. These kids are not motivated by the same things. Constancy and continuity in caregiving is important. Here's the thing. I get a lot of calls from people saying, I have a new child in my home. She's really difficult. Would you see her? And of course, I'm going to say, no, I won't see her. I will see you and her. And how long is she going to be in your home? Yesterday I turned down a case where I've been asked to help children settle down. Their behaviors are really, really, really hard, but we don't know if they're going back to the family, the birth family. We don't know if they're going to stay in foster care. We don't know if they'll be permanency. And why in the world would I want to remove the symptoms these children have learned to survive if they have to go back to the environment and they'll have to survive in? That would be unethical. So we want to be careful because symptoms are nothing but adaptive strategies that help kids figure out how to survive. That's what they are. We call them symptoms. They're really just strategies to live by. Predictable problems for caregivers. This is called a normative crisis. Normative is the word we would use because it's normal. It happens a lot. This is where you get with these children. I don't like you. I don't want you around here. I don't think I can help you. I can't help you. I don't even want to help you. I'm not very good at this. You call me and say, I don't like this child doesn't like me, she says she'd like to be somewhere else, and maybe she should be somewhere else. That's normal. That's really normal. These children will make us feel pretty incompetent and pretty useless. That isn't true. It's just how they feel. They feel that way, and they're happier when we feel that way too. There's nothing wrong with you, and you need to just hang in with those kids. And then you need to call somebody you trust and say, oh, here's what I'm feeling. And if they've been in the business more than 2 hours, they'll say, oh, yeah, we all feel that way once in a while. And they do this, don't they? They hate you. They mistreat you. They lie to you. Dr. Greg Keck, the author of the books, Parenting Her Child and Adopting Her Child, says, these children lie to us like they have been lied to. They hurt us like they have been hurt. And they break things like they have been broken. And I think that's a pretty good way to talk about the concept of projection. They really do lash out at the people who are there instead of the people who left them. But that's all that's left, just the people who are there, and that's you. Ideas, be consistent. Don't think about, oh, they're just acting out for negative attention. If you're a neglected child, attention is the prize, and you don't care if the parent is yelling at you, spanking you, or talking to you, hugging you, as long as the parent is doing something with you instead of ignoring you. Look at the child and touch the child. Be sad for the child. I'm sorry you can't go to the birthday party tonight. I'm really sad. I wish you could. But because you had a difficult day on the bus, you know, it's probably not safe for you to go to that party. You'll get in more trouble. We'll do something tonight instead. That's a consequence, but it's a meaningful consequence. Don't ask why again. Why were you naughty on the bus? How would the kid know? Because I've had a rotten life and nobody ever did anything good for me, and I was going home and I was worried that you wouldn't be there. You said you were going to Kmart, but I was not sure if you'd really be going to Kmart because my mom ditched me at Kmart. That's not what the kid's going to be able to say, but they might be remembering it. And we use words. Wow, on the way home from the bus, on the bus today, you really had some big feelings. I wonder if you were scared. I wonder if you were scared today because I told you that I might not be home for the first 5 minutes. Parts language. What does that mean? I just used this concept today. When we say, one of the silly things we say to children is, I like you, but I don't like your behavior. And we think the child is going to understand that they are a valued person, but sometimes their choices aren't so good. And look at if you have a partner with you tonight, or if you have a partner later on. If you think, you say to your partner, hey, how do I look today? And like on the way here, I said to my teenage daughter, sweetie, how do I look? And she says to me, Mom, your hair's a mess, but I like your jacket. I wouldn't come here feeling like I looked good, because I would have only heard my hair's a mess. I wouldn't have heard my jacket looks good. And I am a discerning adult. I should be able to say, oh, look good. Half of what you said was good. Whatever, okay? No, I wouldn't hear that. I'd only hear the bad. That's what children hear, especially her kids. They only hear bad. They wouldn't hear part of me is good and part of me isn't. What do we do instead? We use parts language. The part of you, and I just used it today, and it's always fun when it works. And he's a very, very, very oppositional foster kid. He says he just wants to argue about everything, and he's got a lot of diagnoses. But and the foster mom is trying to tell him, Bob, your behaviors, your choices, and all he's hearing is you. And I said, boy, that part of you that comes out, that gets funny and smirky, I haven't seen that part of you. I really like that part of you. And he looked at me like, is this a trick? And then I said, and I also saw earlier today you have a mean part. I hadn't seen that part yet either. And he gets this mean look on his face. And then I said, but what I did notice is when you got that funny, smirky part of you out, the mean part isn't anywhere near. And he broke into this big grin like, duh, that's absolutely right. And he could go home thinking, I have a mean part, I have a funny part, I have a sweet part. And his foster mom could say, I wonder after dinner when your mean part comes out a lot, I don't know why it does, if we could do something different so that funny, smirky part could be there more. And can you be in charge of that? Can your funny, smirky part be in control of the mean part? Which one's bigger? Which one's stronger? And kids can even differentiate and draw pictures of the big, strong part of their body and their brain. And it's a nicer, easier, more concrete way to think about differentiating the behavior from the child. Prognosis, here's the beauty. These children do get better. Do they get all the way better? I don't know. If you have some important lost loves in your relationship, do you ever forget them? No. Do you learn from them? Maybe. Do you ever completely heal from them? Not if you're a really little child and you've had multiple hurts and multiple traumas. You don't. Because your brain is hardwired to accommodate trauma and loss. That doesn't mean that you won't have intense, satisfying love relationships. It means you'll have to work harder. It means you'll have to make more conscious choices to trust and to love and to take some chances. It means all of those things. But these kids, and those of you who have been in the business long enough, know what I'm talking about. Now, when you've got the 12, 13, 14-year-old in your house, you wonder, will that ever be true? Or the 2, 3, and 4-year-old. But I will tell you, recently I've had encounters with several 19 and 20-year-olds that I worked with years ago, and they are thriving. And they were considered bad kids, and they also have some components of fetal alcohol. And those kids are doing so much better than we would ever have predicted. And you know what the factors for success were? Positive caregiving. Comorbidity. You can treat the symptoms of anxiety or depression or hyperactivity, but you will never really treat the lack of regulation in the brain with medication, okay? And always, RAD takes front seat when it's a diagnosis. And I'm going to say that always, and then I'm going to move to the next diagnosis and say, except one. Except when you have fetal alcohol, okay? Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is what we used to call FAE or FASD. You either had a mild case or you had a severe case, and that was the only 2 cases you could have. Never mind all the medium gray areas. And if you the child didn't look impaired physically with facial anomalies, they had the mild case. But if they looked sort of quirky and they had some of the physical features, then they really had the severe case, and we knew they would be pretty impaired. What do we know now? Now we know that the face of the baby, certainly the lower part of the baby, formed very early in pregnancy, and if for whatever reason birth mom is pregnant during those few days, the baby might be born looking pretty typical, and mom might be drunk the rest of the time, and the baby might be horribly impaired. So we miss diagnose and we underdiagnose many children who do have this disorder. And only when we know we really have a birth parent who drank a lot do we even think many times about even having an evaluation. Sad thing, it is permanent and it causes lifelong problems. Unlike RAD, where I would say with a big smile, these kids get better. I'm going to tell you, the fetal alcohol kids get better, but they have brain damage that is lifelong, that is permanent, that will cause them problems for most of their life. Different kinds of problems depending on the developmental stages and depending on the degree of impairment. Okay, so what happens when the two meet? Hey, or oi, it's bad. You don't want these two as a diagnosis, and I say that glibly because they're very common. They're very, very common to have a RAD child who's been prenatally exposed, and it's also not uncommon to have a FASD child that's had a difficult story with not a very positive attachment history. Does that make sense? Now, this is going to be a little confusing. Children with RAD don't necessarily have FASDA, and children with FASDA can develop positive attachments, okay? Just because you're fetal alcohol doesn't mean you can't learn to trust and fall in love completely. And so can RAD kids. Both can form positive attachments. But that's when I said the damage is worse with FASDA because you can't do anything really to repair that brain that's been damaged prior to birth. Characteristics. This sounds like RAD in some ways. Organization, memory problems, auditory learning problems, learning legs, sometimes smaller body and stunted growth, sometimes facial characteristics, impulsivity and lack of problem solving. More symptoms. They are quick to have a meltdown. They have trouble accepting responsibility. Here's a hallmark. They make the same mistakes over and over and over, and they do not put sequences together. So to say to the child, if you do this, then I'm going to do that, you can do that 50 times, and each time you give the same consequence, the child's going to look at you with surprise, like, why are you doing that? What does grounded have anything to do with calling my sister a slob? I don't get it. Huh? Wow, they are connected. No, they're not. That was my sister. That wasn't you. And then you can say, each time you call your sister a name, you'll be grounded. And each time you give the child the consequence, they'll look at you like you're a moron because they won't get it. They won't connect the dots. And they'll make the same mistake. I just had a young adult tell me, she said she got arrested for shoplifting from Target. And she said, oh, you mean every time I go to Target I have to show him my credit card? I thought because I was there last week and showed him my credit card that was enough. You mean all the time I have to do that? And she didn't get it. She wasn't trying to shoplift. She just didn't put what we think of as that common sense piece together and go, oh, yeah, that makes sense to me. They have poor boundaries. These people, again, children can fall in love or form superficial relationships pretty quick. They can have a new best friend every week. And then they lie and take things and they break the rules. And it is not because they don't have a conscience. They have a conscience, and they feel remorse, and they feel empathy, but they just don't get how, like that one girl who took the money and didn't figure out how her foster mom felt bad. She didn't connect the dots. It didn't make sense, okay? That's how these children operate. FASD treatment. Support and educate the caregiver. That would be you all. Find a specialist. The average mental health professional is not trained to know what to do with a FASD child who's got a lot of problems. And when I think about interventions for FASD, I think about autistic kids. The treatment modalities look a lot the same. Now, if I want to treat a RAD child, I might do a nice narrative therapy. With the FASD child, they may or may not remember the story week to week, and I might not do that. And I might do a very structured routine as if they had autism. And I'm going to break it down, and I'm going to use visual cues, and I'm going to use a lot of adaptive strategies to help their brain make connections their brain doesn't automatically do. The can't won't. Many times with these children, we say, you could do this if you wanted to. And here's the deal. On Monday, Sally goes to school and learns multiplication. That's a good thing. She does well. She gets a smiley face on her paper. And foster dad sees it in her backpack and says, Sally, way to go, you rock. You did great in math. Sally's proud. Sally goes to school on Wednesday. She has a test. It's just a review. It's the same worksheet. And she sits there and stares at her paper. All the other kids are busy writing, going, we know this. We know this. This is cool. Or, can't remember this one. Or, how do we do this? And Sally's palms are starting to sweat. And Sally's starting to feel really bad. And then it gets worse because the teacher comes over and says, Sally, your paper's blank. Why is your paper blank? Sally, you know how to do this. You can do this. You did it fine on Monday. And Sally looks up and gets that sort of oppositional look that she's trained herself to get to keep people from getting too close. And the teacher comes over a second time and says, Sally, get busy, girlie. You don't have much more than 15 minutes. If you don't do your math, you're not going to go to recess. Sally pees her pants. Or Sally says to the teacher, shut up. Or Sally does something, anything to get out of that place of hell. Sally can't stand feeling that stupid. And Sally knows dang well that she did fine on Monday. What happened for Sally is that she learned it Monday. She attached that skill to a memory pod, if you think about it like that, and she tucked it away. But unlike you or me, where we keep our stuff stored in the same spot for the most part, she doesn't. It's random. And so Wednesday, when she needed to access math memory, she had no idea where she put it. Now, she might find it Saturday morning when she could care less and go, oh, yeah, there it is. She'll take it out and she'll put it away somewhere else again. But you don't operate like that. If I said, where's your garage, you'd remember where your garage is because you've stored the memory of your garage in the same spot in your brain all the time. You have probably never misplaced your garage, right? You wouldn't imagine, okay? Sally might lose her garage. She might not remember how to find her garage some days because that's how her memory works. And then to say, you could do this if you wanted to, and then maybe as the foster parent, you get a call or a note, Sally was oppositional, Sally had an attitude, Sally has extra math homework today, she needs to turn in tonight, or she needs to do with you tonight for tomorrow, or she's going to be in trouble because she had an attitude with me. And I can tell you with great certainty that we do that to children every day with the assumption that they're choosing not to do something when they can't. And then we make it worse by punishing them. Prognosis. It's a lifelong challenge. These kids are not going to be typical in many of their milestones. They're going to do the milestones. They're going to do them later. They're going to need some supportive services for different things. They can leave home. They can have healthy babies. They can have jobs. They can join the military. I know a police officer. I know lots of people who are thriving, doing things differently, and having decent lives. And again, like Rad, we're going to say these kids are doing better than we expected. It's one of the things we know is early intervention matters. Good intervention matters. Great parenting matters. And a lot of punishments and consequences to shape their behavior does almost nothing. If it did, we would use more jails than we even use now. Comorbidity, it takes precedence. Whenever you've got FASDA as a diagnosis, whether it's anxiety, and it could be, and depression, which it probably is, and ADHD, which would be very common, you're going to know that you have to address the FASDA first, okay? So if you have a FASDA kid with ADHD and they're going to take medication, you're going to have a pill box, or you're going to make sure that you give that child their medication even if they're 19, because they won't remember if they took it or not. So you're going to have an adaptive strategy to deal with the ADHD because they're FASD. Boy, that's a lot of letters in one sentence. Wow. I did good, and it's late. There's usually more than one thing going on, and we're summarizing. I know you're sighing. Go ahead, sigh with relief. Look at your neighbor and go, thank God she's about done yammering. This is so good. We're going to be out of here. In summary, okay, breathe. There's usually more than one thing going on. There's almost never, for the population you and I work with, just quote unquote, one diagnosis. Using a professional and informal support system is essential for you caregivers. That means the neighbor down the road, that means your friend across the street, that means the people in your church, that means your parent support group, that means your extended family and relatives, that means your case managers, your licensing workers, and anybody else you can get your hands on. All of that support as you're raising hard-hurt children is helpful. They often do overcome their difficulties, and they often are successful. If you didn't believe that, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. Innately, I think kinship foster families are optimistic. You believe in childhood and you want to do something about it. Don't ever overlook the self-care component in this business. And I say business, and I don't mean to belittle it in any way. It's a calling, and it's a commitment, and it's not really a business. But you're in the business, per se, of caring about children. And know that working with hard kids, the people who don't do what you do really won't get it. And when you say, yeah, I had a child in my house yesterday, and you know, first she was going to cook something, and she got mad, because I wouldn't let her, and then she went upstairs and started cooking something in her room. It's like, yee. Or, yeah, you know, my 12-year-old, before I got home, decided to experiment with what would burn in a microwave. Ew. And people look at you and go, how could that be? I would have grounded him till he was 20. Yeah, they don't get it, right? Because you wouldn't do that. You would go, ooh, let me teach you about microwave safety, maybe. Dignity. This is just a word. As adults in the foster care system and as working with children in that system, many times we write reports, we send reports, we study these children, we evaluate and assess these children. I come to your house and I evaluate and assess you, and then I send a report about you somewhere. And somehow, inadvertently, in that process, your confidentiality and the child's confidentiality and dignity is lost. We don't mean to do it, but sometimes it's done. And I want to just have us all do a sort of mental check. How good a job do we do of guarding the dignity of the foster children that we care for and care about in our families and in our homes and in our offices as we talk about and meet about these children and write and send reports about them. So that's just sort of a self-encouraging self-check. We can all be more mindful of this. Your resources, know who they are, and each and every one of you have communities chock full of resources to one degree or another. Some communities are just rich in non or informal support systems. We know we have that church group over the Presbyterians that does Wednesdays. We know we have the VFW that does Tuesday morning whatever. Different communities have different things, and and if you don't know, you need to start talking to your licensing worker or your county worker or your placing worker and find out who the resources are. That's true in the mental health field too. If you start asking around, you will quickly learn who's good and who isn't, who can be helpful and who won't, who will listen to you or who will know everything before they meet you. Remain hopeful. In closing, if you weren't hopeful, you wouldn't be a caregiver for a hurt child. And you need to believe in the hopefulness of childhood, because you only really get to do that once. You get to be an older, playful adult. And the children that come to your houses have lost their innocence. They've lost their optimism. They've lost their sense that they can wake up in the morning and expect something good. They've probably lost their virginity. They've lost the sense that adults can be counted on. For you to restore some sense of innocence and hopefulness and optimism is really what it's all about. Because without hopefulness and optimism and a sense that life is good, there's not much of a rosy picture out there for these children. And so always, in each and every day, in each and every conversation that you have, being mindful that what you're doing is helping these little people grow up to be better, more humane adults. And with that in mind, I want to thank all of you for sitting and listening to this tonight. I hope you've learned something that's useful. You can email Cammie for the things you haven't learned that was useful. She will let me know. And I suspect that there will be more trainings and more in-depth on other diagnoses as time goes on. But this was, again, just an attempt to do an overview. Have a good night. Go home and hug your kids.
Well, that concludes our training for this evening. I hope you found something useful that you can take home and use with the children that you served tonight. I just want to say two things. I wanted to thank Deena McMahon and Sharon Durkin and all the technical staff and all the site facilitators and the work that they did to organize the training. And I also wanted to remind you to please complete your evaluation. Your input is very valuable, and I would appreciate you taking the time now before 9 to be able to just fill that out and give that to someone so it can be sent back to us here at DHS. Thank you.